Chapter 1204. By the time he received the letter, it was already noon of the second day. It took 2 fast horses to deliver the letter. Hardenbarter, who was wearing the king's robes, nervously opened the letter. What he was most worried about was the 5-star army attacking the city. Daichin, who was standing beside him, also felt the same way about Hardenbarter's worries. When he saw that the letter was opened and the new king was stunned, he couldn't help but feel even more nervous. He carefully asked, "Your Majesty, did something go wrong?" Hardenbarter didn't reply to General Daichin's question. He was still stunned. When he was asked a second time, he finally handed the letter over. "General, look at it yourself." Daichin took the letter with a trace of nervousness. After carefully reading it, he couldn't help but laugh. Good news, good news. King, the 5-star army didn't dare to attack the city after suffering a loss. From this, we can see that they aren't as strong as the rumors say. As long as we can defend the city and wait for our reinforcements to arrive, we can definitely keep them out of the city. This way, our country will be safe. At that time, when the other countries come to help, it will be time for us to fight back with all our strength. Daichin's idea was indeed correct. Defend the city and not let the 5-star army attack. Then, gather the forces of Ili Li, Yi Erqiang, and Wara's cavalry. They will have hundreds of thousands of soldiers. At that time, their military strength will exceed the enemy's and their supply lines will be much closer. This way, their chances of victory will be much higher. After a bout of laughter, Daichin noticed that the new king was still frowning. Confused, he asked, "King, this is good news. Why aren't you unhappy?" "Well, I feel that something is wrong. How can the 5-star army, which is able to defeat the great Ming Dynasty, and even the cavalry of the grassland, who are the best at fighting, be so weak? Do they still have some kind of plan?" Hardenbarter was indeed one of the kings who established Turpan's strength. He was able to see the problem on the spot. However, General Daichin didn't agree with his idea. "Your Majesty, don't worry. No matter what kind of strategy they have, as long as we don't let them attack and lose 8 Li, then they won't be able to use any ability. At that time, the initiative will be in our hands. Won't we be able to do whatever we want? Of course, if your Majesty is worried, I am willing to immediately rush to your aid." Hearing that Daichin was willing to send reinforcements now, Hardenbarter's face looked much better. "Okay, then I'll have to trouble you. But we only prepared 30,000 soldiers. Is that enough?" "That's enough. 30,000 plus the 20,000 defending the city. That's a total of 50,000 soldiers. That's enough to last for 10 days to half a month, or even longer. At that time, the reinforcements from other countries will arrive as well. There won't be a problem," Daichin said confidently. These words gave Hardenbarter a lot of confidence. He nodded happily and said, "All right, then this king will give you the tiger seal. General, don't worry. This king will immediately urge the other countries to send reinforcements." "Your Majesty, I will go and prepare now. We will be able to lead the troops out in the afternoon," Daichin said excitedly. However, he didn't know what kind of opponent he was about to face. What he didn't know even more was that right now, 8 Li was about to face hell on earth. Yesterday, Yang Chendong gave the order that when the 4th Division arrived, they would immediately attack. When the order was given out, Ling Daqiang, who was escorting the supplies at the back, felt like grass had grown in his heart. He couldn't wait to get to 8 Li's city walls. "Come, call the regimental commanders for a meeting." Ling Daqiang, who couldn't suppress the excitement in his heart, finally couldn't hold it in anymore and called for the 4 regimental commanders. Very quickly, the 1st Regiment Commander Gao Xiang, the 2nd Regiment Commander He Wan, the 3rd Regiment Commander Lu Zheng, and the 4th Regiment Commander Yi Xingfeng hurriedly arrived in front of Ling Daqiang. Then, the 4 of them looked at the commander with inquiring eyes. They didn't understand why he called for everyone to gather when they would be able to reach 8 Li's city walls tomorrow. Ling Daqiang didn't immediately speak. Instead, he looked at the 4 regimental commanders. Seeing that they didn't know what was going on, he couldn't help but laugh. "All right, there's no need to guess anymore. I'll tell you now. This is a good thing." As he spoke, Ling Daqiang took out the telegram he just received. The 4 regimental commanders quickly passed it around and read it clearly. Then the eyes of the 4 regimental commanders all lit up. The 1st Regiment Commander Gao Xiang said without hesitation, "Our 1st Regiment is the main force. This time, it will definitely be our 1st Regiment's turn to shine." Hey, you can't be like this. Every good thing goes to the 1st Regiment first. Our 2nd Regiment isn't satisfied. The 2nd Regiment Commander Hewen immediately expressed his opposition. Then, the other 2 regimental commanders also expressed their opposition. In the end, the task still fell to Ling Daqiang. Commander Ling Daqiang was very clear that this was an extremely important matter. Everyone wanted to get this mission. It was just that he, as a commander, was in a difficult position as to who to send. In the end, he actually rolled his eyes and used the most primitive method to solve the problem, which was to draw lots. He prepared 4 slips of paper for everyone to draw. 3 of them didn't have anything written on them. Only the last one had the word attack written on it. Whoever got the mission would get it. This method was unanimously approved by the 4 regimental commanders. It was fairer to compete with luck. No one could say anything about it. Just like that, after the 4 regimental commanders competed with their luck, the 2nd Regiment Commander, Hewen, got the slip with the word attack written on it. Ha, our 2nd Regiment will be the attack. After opening the slip in his hand, Hewen shouted with joy. The other 3 regimental commanders had dejected expressions. They looked at Hewen with eyes full of envy. All right, the mission will be given to the 2nd Regiment. But Regiment Commander please remember that your regiment will be escorting 5 100mm mortars at the front of the group. Whether or not you can reach the main camp by noon tomorrow will depend on your ability. If you can't reach on time, the other regimental commanders will be drawing lots. You won't have anything to do. Also, if you don't complete the mission well this time and the landing point is not accurate, the 2nd Regiment won't have anything to do with this kind of mission in the future. Are you willing to accept? Ling Daqiang continued to raise a series of requests to increase the difficulty of the mission. Yes, I'll accept all of them. The 2nd Regiment Commander Hewen said confidently. Speaking of which, as a member of the Cold Vanguard, it was normal for them to practice with cannons. Although they couldn't practice it as often as they practice with guns, they would still have missions to fire from time to time. Once they had a target, they would definitely not miss. Just like that, the other 3 regimental commanders sent Hewen off with envious gazes. The 5 100mm mortars that accompanied the army also left with the 2nd Regiment. In order to complete the mission and complete it efficiently, Hewen rushed all the way. Before noon the next day, he had already arrived 9 miles in the morning. He even took the time to let the soldiers rest for 2 hours and eat some food. Then he placed the 5 mortars 300 meters in front of 8 Mile City. Yang Chendong had already sent someone to set the measuring stick. Now that the target was right in front of them, Hewen started to order the loading of the mortars in front of the entire army. The feeling of being envied in front of so many people was just too good. Yang Chendong brought all the generals out. Especially the Mongolian army led by Na Ri Song. They had already put on their armor and were ready to charge. This was also Yang Chendong's compensation for them. Since they had suffered a loss yesterday, of course they had to make up for it today. On top of 8 Mile City, General Shirigan was looking at the scene below with his soldiers. This is the Red Barbarian Cannon. Because it was located in a remote area, the Rising Sun Gon had never really come into contact with this thing. However, they had heard that it existed. Now that they saw it in front of the city, they could not help but be shocked. Then they shouted at their soldiers, "Quick, find a place to hide, quick!" Although he had never seen the power of the cannon, he believed that since the 5-star army had waited for so long, they would not hesitate when they attacked. Under Shirigan's shouts, the soldiers of Turkmenistan quickly found a place to hide. However, because they did not have enough knowledge, most of the soldiers only hid under the battlements. In his opinion, with the city walls as a defense, it was already safe enough. Regarding the reaction of the people on top of the city, Commander Hewen acted as if he did not hear anything. At this moment, he was still meticulously completing his actions. He ordered his men to adjust the measuring stick and make the necessary preparations. The cannon was being prepared in an orderly manner. Commander Hewan acted as if he did not hear the reaction of the Turkmenistan soldiers below the city gates. This was because he knew that once the cannons were fired, it would be difficult to say where he would be safe. Therefore, whether he hid or not, or where he hid, would be the same. The 5-star army was waiting in formation, especially the Mongolian cavalry led by Nari Song. Although Yang Chendong had said that they could only attack after half an hour of bombardment, he was still fully prepared. The sun hung high in the sky, and from time to time, a cold wind would blow, but at this moment, many people no longer felt anything. Everyone's attention was focused on the 5 pitch-black iron blocks at the front. They were waiting to see how powerful they would be next. Among the cavalry, it was not that no one had seen the power of cannons before. However, most of them had only seen cannons firing one round at a time. Not many of them had seen 5 cannons firing at the same time. The result was not something they could imagine. Everything that was about to happen next made them not even want to blink. They were afraid that they would miss something. Finally, under everyone's anticipation and complicated thoughts, the 5 100mm mortars were ready. The cannons were also loaded. They only needed to wait for the final order to fire 5 rounds. Chapter 1205. Hewan didn't immediately give the order because this was the first time he had to deal with something like this. Although Yang Xie was powerful, his ability to rely on cannonballs was still very weak. The process wasn't up to standard, so out of 10 cannonballs, only 1 or 2 could actually be used. This made them have no choice but to use them sparingly. This was also the reason why cannons weren't widely used until now. It was because the technology wasn't mature enough. Everything depended on a large probability and hard work. It was because of the preciousness of cannonballs that Hewan couldn't help but turn around to look at Yang Chendong. He was waiting for the 6th young master to give the final order. He didn't say anything and only nodded his head, representing Yang Chendong's attitude. Normally, a city with only 50,000 people and 20,000 soldiers didn't need to be so big. However, the shameless sneak attack yesterday made Yang Chendong unhappy. Even if he had to waste some cannonballs, he wanted to make the enemy pay the price. He wanted to tell the world what the consequences of messing with the 5-star army were. After receiving the final order, Hewan's eyes flashed with excitement. He quickly turned around and shouted with a red flag in his hand, "Cannoneers, prepare to fire!" "Fire!" Hewan shouted with all his strength, causing the veins on his neck to pop out. Along with this shout, boom 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 boom. The 5 cannons roared at the same time, and a beam of fire shot out from the barrel. With a speed that couldn't be followed by the naked eye, it flew towards 8 Mile City, which was 300 meters away. Under the rumbling sound, it attracted the neighs of war horses. Boom 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 boom. The cannons rumbled, and the 100mm mortars showed their ferocious side, mercilessly attacking the target. They hadn't seen the cannons of the future explode all over the mountain and raze it to the ground. This made the people at that time look like ignorant children. Occasionally, they would see a grenade explode, and they would exclaim in surprise. In the eyes of such people, the power of the 100mm mortar was as terrifying as the nuclear bomb tests of the later generations. This was especially so when the mortar landed below the city wall and instantly blasted a large hole in it. Many people were dumbfounded and revealed looks of disbelief. There were also countless people who kept rubbing their eyes at that moment. They wanted to make sure that what they were seeing was real, or that they had been traveling in a dream. Compared to the shock and doubt of these people, the Turpan soldiers and civilians who were the ones being attacked felt the reality of the situation. When the cannonballs whizzed over their heads or exploded beside them, cries and curses could be heard all over the place. Houses collapsed in an instant, stones flew everywhere, shops burned, and severed limbs suddenly appeared on the streets. When fresh and bloody flesh was thrown everywhere, it was like hell on earth. In the next second, no one knew where the cannonball would land. It was like the sword of Damocles hanging over everyone's head, making them feel nothing but fear. No one knew what would happen in the next second. No one knew if they would still be alive in the next second. In the next second, would he become the target of the explosion and be blown into pieces? The morale of the soldiers and the people began to collapse at that moment. The inside of the city was like hell on earth. Every breath seemed to pass by very slowly. Outside the city, many soldiers of the 5-star army were dumbfounded. Among them were some company commanders, battalion commanders, regiment commanders, and even division commanders. Many of them knew that cannons were very powerful, especially the 5-star army's cannons. They had tried their best to overestimate the power of the cannons, but they could not help but be amazed. The reality was more spectacular and powerful than they had imagined. It could only be said that their imagination still needed to be improved and increased. Because of that, many people were secretly sizing up Hewen's 2nd Regiment, who was still firing the cannons. Many people were also amazed by Bugnam of Gojoseon's strength and power. This was because he was the one who had invented and created these things under his guidance. Fire! Hewen was still waving the little red flag. At that moment, he had entered a half-crazy state. Every time he fired a cannon, his face would turn red. He was immersed in this moment. Enough! Yang Chundong looked at the watch on his wrist. He looked at Beta Persei next to him and said softly. This voice also awakened Beta Persei, who was also in shock. Although he was Yang Chundong's guard, it was rare to see a scene like this. Yes. Beta Persei responded and quickly rode to Hewen's side. He said loudly, Young Master's order is to stop firing. Stop loading cannons. Hewen quickly reacted and shouted. Then he had a distressed look on his face. Looking at the empty cannonball boxes, he wanted to cry but had no tears. This time they had fired more than 10 cannonballs than planned. These were the treasures of the 4th Division. He really didn't know how the division commander would deal with him if he saw them. The rumbling of the cannonballs finally stopped. Narasatsu, who was half a beat slower, finally reacted. When he looked around, he found that the city gate that was 8 miles away had already flown away. There was not even a shadow of the enemy in sight. He could not help but laugh and then shouted, Mongolian cavalry, listen to my order. Follow me and kill. After the word kill was spoken, the scimitar was unsheathed. Then the sound of horse hooves shook the sky. Take advantage of the situation. The Mongolian cavalry's complicated situation had arrived. No one would have thought that just yesterday, the Mongolian cavaliers would be caught off guard and killed by the Mongolian cavaliers. It had only been a day, and their chance for revenge had presented itself. Facing an opponent who also had no ability to resist, they began a massacre that was unique to them. They had long been ordered to attack without mercy. This time, the Mongolian cavalry only faced 20,000 Turpan soldiers who were defending the city. There were also civilians who wanted to resist with sticks and even pots and pans. In short, there was no right or wrong in war, because everything was wrong. Enemies were not absolute either. Those who had weapons were enemies. Nearly 20,000 Mongolian cavaliers charged into the city like ferocious beasts, causing the city that was already covered in blood to become even dimmer. This day was destined to be a day in hell for the soldiers and civilians who were 8 miles away from the city. Yang Chundong rode on his horse as if he did not hear all of this. It was not that his heart was as hard as stone, but he knew very well that evil people needed to be dealt with by evil people. Perhaps some people would understand that if you respected them, they would return the favor tenfold. But to some people, if you backed down, you would only be seen as a sign of weakness. To such people, only by killing them could one completely subdue them mentally and physically, such that they would never dare to have any thoughts of resistance. Naturally, this was a way to treat the symptoms but not the root of the problem. But it did not matter. Yang Chundong still had a backup plan, which was to move the civilians away. When a place was filled with strangers, their so-called national spirit would naturally crumble. If they could live a good life, then no one would rebel. A war that could not be considered a war that was just a massacre, finally ended after the Mongolian cavalry vented their anger. After the battle, out of the 20,000 Turpan soldiers, over 8,000 were killed, and the captives were all injured. Out of the 50,000 civilians, over 5,000 died, and many were injured. This was the result of playing tricks with the 5-star army. Maybe if they did not play tricks and fought head-on, they would not have suffered such heavy losses. What was worth mentioning was that the defending general, Shirigan, had died under a giant rock. One could deduce that a cannonball had blown up the battlements, and unfortunately, It landed on his body. A Turpan heavy general actually died just like that on the ground. It was as his name implied. Storm, he died in a storm. Your Majesty, your subordinate is untalented. About 200 cavalrymen escaped, and we were unable to catch up. Na Raizong appeared in front of Yang Chendong, his body reeking of blood. No worries, someone needs to report. Yang Chendong did not care about this at all. He even felt that the number of people who escaped was too little. In his eyes, those soldiers who had seen such a scene would not be able to fight against the 5-star army. The shadow in their hearts was their greatest enemy. 8 Mile City, which was seen as a natural stronghold, was lost just like that. From the start of the attack to the complete occupation, it took less than 4 hours. When the 200 cavalry that escaped scattered, and a portion of them returned to Turpan City, it was already the night of the second day. The new king, Hardenbarter, was woken up from the palace, and he learned about what had happened from the general on duty. What? 8 Mile City was lost, the 20,000 troops were wiped out, and Shirigan general died in battle. After hearing the report from the general on duty, Hardenbarter fell back into his throne, his eyes devoid of light. How could this be? How could this be? After a long while, Hardenbarter finally sobered up, but he still couldn't stop himself from blurting out this sentence. King, I heard from the soldiers that escaped that the 5-star army used a powerful cannon that turned the entire 8 Mile City into hell. When the general on duty said this, his whole body trembled. He couldn't help but think that if this was true, then how could they use swords and spears to fight against the cannons? What was the difference between this and throwing away their lives? Cannons? Powerful cannons? How is this possible? This king has also heard of the Great Ming's Divine Machine Battalion, but it was not that powerful. Hardenbarter asked in disbelief. Chapter 1206. But the soldiers who escaped all said so. My king, how should we deal with these people? The general on duty asked carefully. Because he was a general, he knew that if this matter was spread out, it would affect the morale of the army. He was afraid that no one would dare to fight against the 5-star army. How should we deal with them? Lock them all up. If anyone dares to say anything, behead them on the spot. Hardenbarter was indeed an ambitious person. He quickly thought of the crux of the matter, and revealed a ferocious look to the general on duty. Understood, my king. The general on duty nodded, and went out to handle the matter. In fact, he wanted to say that it wasn't just these people who escaped. There were also some soldiers who ran away who didn't know where. He was afraid that the news couldn't be hidden. However, he didn't dare to say anything because he was afraid of Hardenbarter's gaze. He was afraid that his king would let him handle this matter. Wouldn't that be asking for trouble? The general on duty was right. At this time, the news couldn't be hidden anymore. This was because the soldiers who escaped were already terrified. When they escaped, some of them randomly chose a direction and ended up in different cities. This news spread along with these people. However, this wasn't the most depressing thing. What really made the Turpan kingdom unable to bear was General Daichin, who had already led 30,000 troops to battle. While he was on his way to the city of Bali with 5,000 cavalry and 25,000 infantry, they met with the new army of the Third Army, which was marching towards Turpan. When the scouts from both sides met, there was naturally a bloody battle. Then the news spread back to each side. Suhi was leading the new army of 20,000 people on the road, when he suddenly heard the scouts say that there was a foreign race army ahead. There were about 30,000 of them, and most of them were infantry. This news made Suhi's body shake, and he was very excited. Since leaving the Liaodong region, Suhi and the new army had been hurrying along. They didn't even fight a decent battle. Even when they were outside the beginning city, they were merely chasing after the enemy. This made him feel stifled. Yang Chendong trusted him so much that he brought him wherever he went, but his contribution was too small. Just as he was vexed and thinking about how to achieve great things in Turpan, the opportunity finally came. Inform all divisions to launch a fierce attack in company units. The two armies had suddenly met, and there was no time to prepare a battle plan. However, Suhi trusted his officers. He believed that they would not fail their mission and inflict heavy losses on the enemy. Although such an encounter came very suddenly, the new three armies had already undergone the corresponding training. At this moment, it was the time for them to display their subjective initiative. What mattered was which officer reacted faster, and the rewards would naturally be greater. He had been by Yang Chendong's side for many years, and had fought with his opponents for a long time. He had seen all kinds of situations and had made all kinds of preparations. None of this was a problem. The new army had such confidence. But in comparison, Daiqin didn't have such ability. This didn't mean that Daiqin's commanding ability wasn't good, but that the reaction of his soldiers was much worse. When the scouts at the front sent news that they suddenly met the 5-star army 10 miles ahead, Daiqin's first reaction was that it was impossible. It could be said that he was unlucky. Because he was traveling on the official road, he didn't encounter a single deserter who was scared out of their wits. Naturally, he didn't believe that there would be a large number of 5-star army in the hinterland of Turpan. 8 Mile City was guarded by the Rising Sun Gon and 20,000 elites, so it couldn't be broken through so easily. It must be a small group of the 5-star army that charged in from who knows where. This was Daiqin's first reaction. But out of caution, he ordered the army to stop moving forward. He would personally bring 5,000 cavalry to see what was going on. In Daiqin's mind, the 5-star army wouldn't have too many people. With him leading 5,000 cavalry, it would be enough. Even if they really encountered a large number of enemy troops, he would still have the chance to retreat and form a defensive line. At that time, as long as he could hold the enemy here and then ask for reinforcements from the king, he could even launch a pincer attack with the Rising Sun Gon general. This would deal a heavy blow to the 5-star army and make a great contribution. To be able to think of such a plan in such a short time, Daiqin could be considered a qualified general. But he neglected two important points. First, the so-called pincer attack only had one side left. This meant that this plan wouldn't work. Second, not only were his opponents strong, his 30,000 troops couldn't compare to them. It had been more than 10 years, and the Turpan kingdom had not had any wars with the outside world. Their army had been living too comfortably. Although the training had been carried out before, when they encountered one of the elites under Yang Chendong's command, the new Third Army, it was naturally not enough. Not many people could predict the outcome of a battle before it even started, much less when General Daiqin was still so confident. He brought 5,000 cavalry and charged out first. They were ferocious, like a dragon coming out of the sea. Under the envious gazes of the 20,000 infantry, the 5,000 cavalry charged out. Half of the 30,000 Turpan soldiers were new soldiers that joined in recent years. A complete conscription system was one of the most important military reforms in Turpan. In history, it was because they were one step ahead of other countries that the strength of their army was maintained at a very high level. The soldiers were old and needed to be replaced, or they were injured and were not suitable for prolonged battles. Furthermore, the country valued the soldiers and the corresponding policies improved, so the status of soldiers in the Turpan kingdom was not low. Because of this, many young people were attracted to join the army. More than half of the soldiers were young people who yearned for glory. It was said that a soldier who didn't want to be a general wasn't a good soldier. These people came because of this. The way to fulfill this wish was to enter the battlefield and kill the enemy. This was an advanced method of replacing soldiers. Even now, Yang Chendong didn't dare to try it. This was all because his goal was too big. He needed more experienced soldiers. If he eliminated all of them, he wouldn't have the time to train more new soldiers to fight and win. Turpan did it. One had to admit that they were very bold. However, this also had a fatal flaw. A soldier who had never seen blood would forever be a new recruit. They would not be able to understand the cruelty of the battlefield, nor would they understand how important it was to maintain a balanced mentality in this life and death situation. And now it was time for the 5-star army to teach them a lesson. When the 5,000 cavalrymen walked past the new recruits with envy, they suddenly retreated. Just like when they left, the 5,000 cavalry were still 5,000 cavalry. But the difference was that they didn't have the high spirits from before. Instead, they were in a sorry state. If one had to use an idiom to describe it, it would be that they were like birds startled by the twang of a bow. Among them, The one who ran the fastest was the role model of many of the new soldiers, General Daiqin. Daiqin was originally full of confidence, but not long after he charged out, he saw the 5-star army cavalry covering the sky and earth. Especially when the enemy used companies as a unit, and each company had a bright 5-star flag. At that moment, it was as if the entire sky was dyed red. Daiqin's pride instantly disappeared, and what replaced it was fear, and finally, he turned around and left. On such a battlefield, he could no longer analyze how many enemies there were. However, he knew that if he really led 5,000 cavalrymen into battle, it would be equivalent to sending lambs into a tiger's den. In the end, not a single one of them would be able to escape. How is this possible? There are so many enemies. What is Shirigan doing? Why didn't he report it? Why? As he retreated, he kept cursing Shirigan. Completely unprepared, Daiqin was caught off guard. Facing the powerful new army, his confidence was gone. All he could think of was to retreat. To put it bluntly, it was to escape. One soldier was fearful, while the general was fearful. When the main commander had his fear embedded in his bones, it was easy to imagine how this battle would continue. There was no hope of winning this battle. The 5,000 cavalry returning so quickly gave the 25,000 infantry a lot of confusion. Some of the old soldiers who had participated in the war had a bad look on their faces. Experience seemed to have told them the answer. But for the new soldiers who were participating in the war for the first time, they couldn't understand. Some even naively thought, was this General Daiqin's way of training the soldiers? Was it to test how fast the cavalry was? No matter what kind of thoughts these people had, the truth would tell everyone what had happened. Just as the 5,000 cavalry returned to the infantry camp, behind them, an eye-catching red flag appeared. Then 10,000 horses galloped, as if Mount Tai was pressing down on them. At first there was only one flag, then a few flags. But then more and more red flags appeared. It was as if they suddenly grew in the sky, giving people a feeling that there was no end to them. And these red flags only came from one direction, the direction of the 30,000 Tulu army. Prepare to fight. Set up the formation. Archers, spearmen step forward. Finally returning to the side of his own army, Daiqin, whose expression was still uncertain, started to shout out orders. Even though he was frightened by the enemy's formation, but as a general, his responsibility was to command the battle. Even though he knew that the chances of victory were slim, he still had to do it. This was his mission. Chapter 1207. Daiqin was already standing at the position he was supposed to be standing at, and the order had already been read out by him. If it was during training, with his shout, the soldiers below would definitely obey in unison. The archers and pikemen would definitely have rushed to the front. And behind them, the Pialans and short-bladed soldiers would have started to raise stakes and set up tripping ropes and other things. It could be said that the Turkopan kingdom had put in a lot of effort in training to deal with cavalry. This caused their confidence to swell, and they dared to face any opponent or provocation. However, training was still training. They didn't even know what a drill was. When they were actually on the battlefield, these things suddenly became so useless. When they saw the enemy cavalry approaching from all directions, when they felt the earth tremble at this moment, when they felt the breeze that blew against their faces, when they felt a wave of austere air, when they felt a wave of murderous intent, the minds of the recruits were completely blank. At this moment, they couldn't remember what military order, what training program, and even where they were supposed to stand. Everyone could only stare blankly in front of them. The enemy is here. What are you waiting for? Cavalry, release the arrows. Daiqin noticed this scene and felt a chill in his heart. They had never been to a war before, but when the real war came, they were afraid of the enemy. Seeing that the 5-star army was getting closer and closer, they didn't have much time left. Daiqin roared and gave the order to the cavalry beside him to shoot. He wanted to use blood to tell these recruits that they were on the battlefield and not training. If they didn't pay attention, then the only thing that awaited them was death. The 5,000 cavalry made up of all veterans looked much better than the recruits. When they heard General Daiqin's order, although they couldn't bear it, they were after all their comrades, their countrymen. However, military orders were like mountains, and they couldn't afford to hesitate or slack off. Arrows were nocked and arrows were prepared. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. One after another, iron-tipped bows and arrows flew through the air, shooting toward the very front of their own troops, where the archers and spearmen were supposed to be in formation and ready to defend against the enemy. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The arrows all fell, hitting the backs of the unprepared and stunned soldiers. In just one wave of attacks, at least hundreds of people were killed or injured. Fresh blood assailed their nostrils. When death was right in front of them, some of the recruits were so scared that their footsteps became unsteady. They didn't know where to go. However, even more soldiers were awakened by the shock. Their thoughts finally returned to reality, and they already knew that they had to pick up their weapons and prepare for battle. Being forced to do so was also a very correct way to deal with it. Instead of seeing blood, one would be afraid of blood. The moment one saw blood, it was easier to arouse the heroic spirit and fighting spirit in one's heart. One had to admit that Daichin had made the right bet. At the very least, under his orders, at the cost of losing several hundred people, the enthusiasm of the vanguard army was aroused. They finally knew their duty and what they should do next to avoid more deaths and more bloodshed. 3 miles away, the vanguard of the 5-star army had already entered. The new 3 armies formed by the elites of the various Mongolian races were coming over with an imposing aura. They spurred their horses forward, and as they charged, they held their bows in their hands. Shining arrows were pulled out from their quivers, and they were prepared to shoot from afar. For an army that had just come back from the battlefield of one nation, and had made many contributions, they knew how to perform on the battlefield in order to kill the enemy as much as possible and protect themselves as best as possible. Some tactical actions were like blood was thicker than water, and they had become a habit. Just like right now, they were bending over their horses, minimizing their own targets to ensure that when the enemy's arrows came, the possibility of hitting them would be minimized. The moment they looked ahead with bright eyes, they were like a pack of wolves on the grassland, locking onto their prey. This instinct, along with the countless brushes with death, made many of them instinctively feel the threat of death. What kind of enemy could pose a threat to them, and what kind of arrows could hit their positions? When they looked over, they already had a general understanding in their hearts. Therefore, when they saw the performance of the Turpan soldiers, the threat they felt wasn't strong, and could even be said to be weak. The enemy's strength isn't strong, and their morale is low. Take this chance, charge. A company commander at the front, after making a judgment based on his intuition, gave the order to his 100 soldiers. There were many other company commanders like this. Most of them crawled out from piles of corpses. Maybe they couldn't read much, and couldn't speak much, but one had to admit that they had a lot of experience in commanding on the battlefield. A tiger leading a pack of wolves to fight a wolf leading a pack of sheep. This result seemed to have been decided a long time ago. There was a saying in the world about the food chain. What you eat is predetermined a long time ago. Even if there were some miracles, it didn't mean that this principle would be easily changed. Just like now, the 30,000 Turpan soldiers led by Daichin couldn't create any miracles. Release the arrows. When the distance between the two sides was less than 200 meters, General Daichin on the horse let out an angry roar. Technically, they weren't completely within the range of the arrows, but Daichin still gave the order. He was afraid that if the distance was too close, the archers would show their cowardly side again. After the order was given, the 5,000 archers didn't hesitate to release the arrows in their hands. The results of their training finally showed. At least after the order was given, they could execute it. This was already not an easy thing to do. As for the reaction of the soldiers, if General Daichin had to give it a score, he would give it at least 70 points. 5,000 arrows were shot from afar, towards the 5-star army's vanguard cavalry. Under the rain of arrows, there seemed to be no place that was safe. Facing the attack of the arrows, the new army's cavalry showed their rich battle experience. Just like in modern warfare, there were veterans who could accurately predict where the bullets would land and where the cannonballs would land. Many of the cavalry soldiers made all kinds of dodging actions. Some leaned their bodies to the side of their horses, some pulled their horses to the side, some waved their cavalry swords in front of them, and some jumped off their horses and rolled to the ground. No matter what kind of dodging action, it was all based on their position. If they could dodge, they would dodge. If they couldn't dodge, they would block. If they couldn't block, they would abandon their horses. The 5-star Army's military rules had one requirement in this area. How to protect oneself to the greatest extent under the rain of arrows was the most important. As for whether the posture was the same, whether it looked good or not, no one paid attention to it. Under all kinds of dodging actions, the 5,000 arrows only caused a few hundred horses to be shot, and a few hundred soldiers to be injured or killed. Among them, the number of injured soldiers was far greater than the number of dead soldiers. This naturally had to do with the rich battle experience of the new army's cavalry, but at the same time, it also had to do with the fact that the Turpan army had fired their arrows too early. Most of the arrows weren't in range, so they didn't threaten the safety of the new army's cavalry. Reflect. After the first wave of arrows, the new army's cavalry began their counterattack. It was impolite not to reciprocate. Under the speed of the war horses, the distance of a few hundred meters was covered in a flash. Right now, the distance between the two sides was less than 100 meters, which was the optimal range for the arrows. The new army's cavalry began their counterattack. Unlike the blind arrows of the Turfan archers, the arrows of the 5-star army cavalry were very methodical. Based on the positions they occupied, they would choose the opponents closest to them to ensure that each arrow would only target one person, and there would be no duplicates. As such, the vanguard consisted of 6,000 to 7,000 cavalrymen, and the damage dealt by the arrows was on a completely different level from the Turpan archers. When the first wave of arrows landed on the ground, over 1,000 Turpan archers were knocked down to the ground. And all of this was just the beginning. After the first wave of arrows, they didn't need to wait for the previous arrow to hit the enemy. This was an instinct of the 5-star army's cavalrymen. They weren't like the Turpan archers, who still needed to wait for the result after firing an arrow. Then, they would nervously grab their quiver and reload the arrows. This created a situation where the speed of the arrows was completely different. Over 1,000 Turpan archers were knocked to the ground, which greatly disrupted the speed of their arrows. In addition, they were already nervous to begin with, so the speed at which they took out their arrows was much slower than before. As a result, when the second wave of arrows was released, both sides were actually at the same frequency. Whoosh whoosh whoosh, whoosh whoosh whoosh. The scene of arrows clashing appeared. Both sides released thousands of arrows at the same time, rushing towards the opposite side. As a result, some of the arrows actually collided with each other in midair, producing a series of crackling sounds of iron weapons colliding with each other. Then, another large group of Turpan archers were knocked to the ground. Previously, they didn't even have the advantage when they attacked first, let alone when they were shooting at the same time. In the eyes of many Turpan archers, they already had no target. All they could do was instinctively shoot. If they couldn't even see the target's position, how could they talk about accuracy? Archers, back off. Spearmen, get ready. General Daichin's heart ached as he looked at this scene. The performance of his own archers was not as good as he expected. Coincidentally, the performance of the enemy's archers was so good. He knew that if they continued to shoot arrows, his losses would only be greater. Now he placed his bet on the second group of spearmen. He noticed that after a short period of confusion, these spearmen were gradually getting into the right state of mind. Chapter 1208. The archers began to retreat, while the spearmen began to advance. Their shining spears were like a spear formation, waiting for the cavalry of the 5-star army to charge over and pierce through them, giving them a 10,000 spears piercing the heart. The performance of the spearmen was seen by General Daichin, and he couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. Luckily, his training wasn't in vain. After a short period of chaos, they started to get into their roles. Now it was time to deal a heavy blow to the 5-star army. Although it wouldn't be a sure win, it would at least result in a heavy blow. Next would be the final battle between the two sides. The outcome of the battle would be 50-50. Daichin's expression started to return to normal. He wanted to see how the 5-star army would deal with his spear formation. It must be known that even if he brought 5,000 cavalry to charge in, he wouldn't be able to gain any advantage. An inch long, an inch strong. The cavalry wouldn't be able to charge in, and would have to face the sharp spears. They would die without a doubt. It's the spearmen, surround them. Daichin's face was filled with anticipation. The new army's cavalry also discovered the enemy's formation. Then, the company commanders who were in charge of commanding the troops showed disdainful expressions. That's right. Once a warhorse came into contact with a spear, the consequences would be unimaginable. It would be like a lion plunging straight into a well full of thorns. This was also the reason why many armies were used to using spearmen to deal with cavalry. But the new army's cavalry weren't lions. They were humans with intelligence. Seeing that the pikemen had already formed their formation and charging forward would be suicidal, why didn't they circle around them? As the company commanders gave the order to surround the pikemen, the cavalry of the new Third Army suddenly split up from the middle, moving towards the two sides of the Turban infantry that were waiting for them in formation. What? The Five-Star Army's cavalry's response was seen by Daichin. His eyes couldn't help but widen. It must be said that surrounding the enemy wasn't a profound battle tactic. The ancient battle formations were mysterious and could be used in any battle. However, when the Five-Star Army was less than 30 meters away from the spear formation, they were still able to change their formation in such an orderly manner. This was not an easy thing to do. The greatest advantage of a cavalry charge was speed. Under extreme speed, the strength of the saber would often be amplified by several times or even 10 times. For example, when the cavalry charged, each swing of their sabers carried a force of a few hundred jin. This was something that could only be achieved when the man and the horse were one. This resulted in many scenes where the heads of the infantrymen would fly to the sky after the cavalry swung their sabers. It was precisely because the speed was too fast that it created a huge flaw, which was that it couldn't change directions at will. At least, it couldn't change directions as freely as it could with two legs. It was precisely because of this that Daichin decided to use the pike soldier when the distance between the two sides was relatively close. This was to catch the opponent off guard and prevent the opponent from being able to change his direction in time. With 6,000 archers in front, they were densely packed and blocked the vision of the Five-Star Army's cavalry. This increased the concealment of the pike soldier. Suddenly using the pike soldier would increase the chances of dealing a fatal blow to the enemy. But now the Five-Star Army's cavalry actually changed their direction so easily. It looked like they were doing it so skillfully. How could General Daichin not be shocked? This was the first time the enemy was fighting on the battlefield. Everyone wasn't very clear about the enemy's attacking methods. This made it easier for them to use their trump cards. But looking at the Five-Star Army, it was as if they already knew about the pike soldiers' ambush. What was going on? On this point, one couldn't help but say that Daichin's vision was limited. He thought that he was able to lead his troops well. First the archers, then the pike soldiers' sudden appearance would definitely catch the enemy off guard. But what he didn't know was that this tactic had been used by the Japanese army for a long time. As a new army that had fought against the Japanese army and won, they were already used to this tactic. Right now, the Turpan army was just following in the footsteps of the Japanese army. There really wasn't anything new to speak of. But to the Turpan army that hadn't fought in a war for many years, under this kind of speed, the cavalry could still change their direction. This was too shocking. And if Daichin knew that Yang Chendong had given a strict order that the cavalry could only display their full speed when attacking the enemy, under other circumstances, they couldn't maintain their full speed, and had to be prepared to change their direction at any time, then he wouldn't be so shocked. As mentioned before, the new army's composition was mostly made up of the warriors of the grassland tribes. A large portion of them were cavalry warriors that had fought with Tuachuo Buhuakan before. For such experts, changing direction at a distance of 30 meters wasn't difficult at all. Even if it wasn't as easy as eating and drinking, it wasn't much different. The vanguard cavalry of the new army changed their direction and surrounded the Turpan army from both sides. While they were half surrounding the Turpan army, the bows in their hands weren't idle. They shot towards the Turpan army from both sides. The Turpan army's archers had already retreated and returned to their formation. It was impossible to counterattack in a short period of time. This allowed the new army's cavalry to focus on their targets without worrying about being reflected back. Arrows flew through the air, occasionally taking the lives of the Turpan army soldiers. Among them, most of the soldiers were short-bladed soldiers. Piao Dao soldiers split into two sides and protect the formation. Seeing the soldiers being easily killed by the five-star army's cavalry, General Daiqin's heart was bleeding. He had no choice but to change the formation again. After the order was given, the short-bladed soldiers outside the formation started to move inwards. The Piao Dao soldiers inside the formation started to move outwards. There was a bit of chaos in between the two sides. Luckily, there were lessons like this during training, so they didn't lose their composure immediately. As the Piao Dao soldiers walked out of the formation, the arrows of the five-star army's cavalry became powerless. Most of the arrows were blocked by the shields. Once the situation stabilized, General Daiqin let out a sigh of relief. At the same time, he gave another order for the archers to walk out of the formation. He was going to start the counterattack. Infantry had a natural disadvantage against cavalry. On this point, Daiqin had his own understanding. Thus, he didn't feel much pain when he lost 1,000 men. He also believed that once the archers reached the outside and started the counterattack, they would be able to turn the situation around. After all, the five-star army's vanguard cavalry only had 6,000 to 7,000 men. He had 30,000 troops in his hands. Fuck, if you want to counterattack, I'll give you the chance. My men, follow me and charge. A company commander on the left side of the Turfan army noticed the change in the enemy's formation. He cursed and led his men who were still alive to charge. The ones on the outside were only Piao Dao soldiers. According to the saying, they had a natural disadvantage against cavalry and were completely countered. When faced with the sudden charge of the cavalry, even though there were only a company of 100 men, they still managed to carve out a huge gap, killing over 100 Piao soldiers. This caused the formation of the Turfan army to change again and again, becoming even more chaotic. With an example, the other company commanders realized that this charge was very effective. They all followed suit. More and more companies joined the charge. In a moment, the Turfan army that seemed to have a tight defense started to fall into chaos. What was worse was that before the battle, General Su He had said that the divisions, regiments, and battalions could attack on their own. This meant that all the initiative was handed over to the company commander of the first company. In this way, some companies launched a charge, while some companies continued to launch long-range attacks with their bows and arrows. Such a completely uncoordinated attack made General Daiqin feel a sense of helplessness. If the Piao Dao soldiers retreated, they would face the arrows. If they didn't retreat, they would face the charge of the five-star army. No matter how he looked at it, it wouldn't solve the problem. In just this moment of hesitation, many of the five-star army cavalry had already charged into the Turfan army and started a crazy massacre. Some of the Piao Dao soldiers, and archers became their main targets. This also made Daiqin's plan to counterattack fail. It was also at this moment that more and more of the new army cavalry came from afar. They were preparing to join the attack formation. Seeing that their advantage in numbers was about to disappear, General Daiqin sighed and quickly brought his 5,000 cavalry to leave the army and run towards the back. This move was very timely, because if it was 15 minutes later, the new army cavalry would have surrounded them from both sides. At that time, even if Daiqin could charge out, he would have lost at least half of his 5,000 cavalry, or even more. With General Daiqin's escape, the already chaotic formation instantly collapsed. Without a unified command, the general didn't know the soldiers, and the soldiers didn't know the general. Adding on the appearance of the new army cavalry, it was like the last straw on the camel's back. In an instant, the infantry formation completely collapsed. The new army cavalry used this chance to charge into the formation, raising their sabers to kill while shouting the slogan of surrendering to avoid death. No one wanted to die, especially when they knew that they were losing. More and more Turfan soldiers knelt on the ground and threw down the weapons in their hands. The battle was over. Out of the 25,000 Turfan infantry, around 5,000 died or were injured. The remaining 20,000 all surrendered, not a single one escaped. The new army only paid the price of around 1,000 cavalry killed or injured. This great victory made Commander Su He overjoyed, and at the same time, he rewarded the company commander who was the first to launch the attack on the spot. At the same time, this victory was also reported to King Wu Nan, Yang Qindong, who was coming from behind by telegram. Chapter 1209. Good, the first battle was a great victory. Looking at the contents of the telegram, Yang Qindong was in a good mood and laughed loudly. Logically speaking, the first battle was to take down the 8-mile gap. In that battle, they had taken down the eastern gate of the Tulyufan kingdom with almost 0 losses. But in Yang Qindong's eyes, all of this was due to the artillery. Anyone with such a powerful weapon could achieve such an effect. On the contrary, the new army's first battle, killing 5,000 enemies and capturing 20,000 prisoners, this was the real victory on the battlefield. Announce the contents to the entire army and commend Commander Su He. Yang Qindong said with a laugh as he returned the telegram to Wang Shan. Yes. Wang Shan replied, then turned and left. Beta Persei frowned and asked carefully and worriedly, Young master, won't such a commendation cause dissatisfaction among the other commanders? It's not good for unity. Yang Qindong waved his hand and said, winning the battle and making great contributions should be rewarded. It's to let the entire army know and put pressure on the other commanders. All of this was intentional by Yang Qindong. He wanted to let the new army win the battle and stimulate the other commanders, so that they would also rush to make contributions. Only in this way could he solve the problem in Yilabali as quickly as possible. In Yang Qindong's plan, Yilabali was just one of the tens of thousands of places to be conquered. He couldn't waste too much time in such a place. What he needed to do was to sweep everything with the power of thunder. This not only required his own efforts, but also the joint efforts of the other commanders. Delegating power was what Yang Qindong had to do to achieve his goal. If everything was under his command, he could win 1 battle, win 2 battles. But if power was handed over to the commanders, then small victories would accumulate to great victories, and finally complete the victory in the shortest time and extent. This was what he wanted to see. The telegram was sent very quickly and spread throughout the army in the shortest amount of time. When the telegram was delivered to Major General Tian, who of the 1st Cavalry Division, a look of surprise flashed across his face. Then he held the telegram tightly in his hand. Men, informed the 4 commanders to quickly come for a meeting. Tian, whose voice carried a hint of urgency. Several messengers immediately dispersed in all directions. Merely 2 hours later, the 5th Regiment commander, Gong Feng, who was the furthest away from the center of the army, also rushed over. At this point, the 5 regiment commanders had all gathered. While the 5 regiment commanders were still puzzled, Tian, who had already taken out the telegram that was full of wrinkles. After the 5 captains looked through them one by one, their expressions were extremely solemn. This time, the new army snatched the first prize, which was completely out of their expectations. According to Yang Qindong's military plan, the new army was going to attack the capital of Turpan. It was definitely going to be a tough nut to crack. Unless the 4th Division, who was in charge of logistics, arrived, who knew how much effort it would take to conquer it. But now their luck was so good that they actually ran into the Turpan reinforcements and snatched a huge victory. This caused the 1st Cavalry Division, which originally wanted to take down Hoboksary, near Kramer City, to fall behind by a step. By taking Hoboksary, they had cut off the retreat of Ely to the north. This was very important. Yang Qindong didn't just want this huge piece of land. He wanted to eliminate all the opposing forces in this area and achieve complete peace. It was because of the importance of this mission that the 1st Cavalry Division was able to win over the strongest cavalry force. But now Hobox was still 100 li away, and the new army had already sent back news of victory. It was no wonder that everyone was unhappy. This is luck. The 3rd Regiment commander, Hubo-er's face was red as he stretched his neck. Isn't luck a reflection of strength? We only have 20,000 men. Yet we managed to defeat 25,000 of the Turks. 20,000 of them were taken captive, and we only lost 1,000 of our own cavalry. How is this not a great victory? Tianhu said in a low voice. Even though he had always been competing with Su He, and knew that Su He's new army had always wanted to surpass him, as an opponent, he had to admit that Su He's new army had fought beautifully in this battle. Even in the eyes of the 1st Cavalry Division, this was the best they could do. After Tianhu's reprimand, Hu Boer didn't say anything else. He was convinced by this battle result. The 4th Regiment commander, Bai Shuang, also had his head lowered. He could feel the tension in the tent. It wasn't a good thing for a general to be anxious before the battle had even begun. He decided to stand out. He raised his head and said, "Division commander, regimental commanders, since the new army has already taken the credit, if we want to perform better, we have to think of a way to achieve the results." Think of a way to achieve the results? Regiment commander Bai, what do you mean? The 1st Regiment commander, Taimur, scratched his head. He didn't dare to underestimate this student of Bugnam of Gojoseon anymore, but sometimes he just couldn't understand what he was saying. Haha, it's like this. Bai Shuang said humbly. We won't be able to take the credit no matter what. Since that was the case, it was better not to think about it, and focus on how to conquer Hobak Seri at the same time while doing so at the same time with the least cost. Didn't the new army lose 1,000 men? If we only lose 100 men, or even less, to take down the target and report it to teacher, then don't you think we'll have contributed as much? These words made the other regimental commander's eyes light up. The 5th Regiment commander, Gong Feng, was the first to nod and say, "That's right. Regiment Commander Bai's words make sense. I agree. I agree as well." The 1st Regiment commander, Taimur, also hurriedly expressed his opinion. The 2nd Regiment commander, Lu Duo, and the 3rd Regiment commander, Hu Bo also expressed their opinions. Even Division commander, Tian Hu nodded in approval. Regiment commander Bai, do you have any ideas? Yes, your subordinate does have an idea. If we want to force our way in, we'll have to suffer losses no matter what. Since that's the case, why don't we change it to using our wits? If division commander agrees, I'm willing to take a trip into the city and meet the enemy general guarding Hobox, Bai Shuang said with a face full of confidence. Enter the tiger's den? Tianhu frowned when he heard that. Then he asked, how confident are you? At least 70%. Haha, senior master, no one would have thought that we would have such a big appetite. We would first cut off Li's retreat to the north, and then we would have the opportunity to strike first. This is our advantage, and we would have the element of surprise. Bai Shuang explained the general idea in his mind to everyone. Soon the tent was filled with discussions. Hoboxary. As the northernmost city in Ili, the higher-ups never paid much attention to this place. In comparison, regardless of whether it was Turpan or Yirkiang, it was extremely far away. Thus, the general guarding the city had always been in a state of peace. No one would have thought that the great Ili's retreat would be cut off. Naturally, the general guarding Hoboxary Mediz would never have thought of this. Even though he had already learned from other sources that Turpan's 8 miles lost formation was about to become the most advanced formation, he still couldn't raise the alarm in his heart. This was one of the most fatal manifestations of the lack of information. Due to the lack of consciousness, the gates of Hoboxary were still wide open. From time to time, Ili's civilians could be seen entering and leaving. Bai Shuang walked into the city under such relaxed conditions. Bai Shuang didn't expect things to go so smoothly. When he and his 300 elite soldiers successfully entered the city after disguising themselves, he sighed for Mediz, and even more so for the entire city. Immediately send out a communication signal. Find our intelligence personnel in the city, and get a clear picture of the situation. Bai Shuang said to one of his subordinates, and then walked towards the largest inn in the city. As early as when Yang Chendong was dealing with the Japanese army, he had given orders to the intelligence department, asking them to find out the situation of the various forces in the Ili region as soon as possible, including the personal information of the generals. Bai Shuang's idea was very simple. Go straight to the root of the problem. Capture the general when the enemy was unprepared and take over Hoboxary without shedding a drop of blood. All of this started when he entered the city. Now it seemed that everything was going smoothly. But what was unexpected was that the plan was still ruined by someone. And it was their own people who ruined it. All of this started after he checked into the inn and met the intelligence personnel of the security bureau. Wukong Wutsong was a mixed blood. His father was Han, and his mother was Uyghur. As a result, he had a tall figure and a handsome appearance. He was a department of the security bureau led by Yang San. Normally, the more ordinary an intelligence personnel was, the better. On the contrary, if he was too handsome or too outstanding, it wouldn't be suitable. But because of his unique background, Yang San finally gave him an important task after meeting and evaluating him. It could be said that if Wu Tsong performed well, his future would be limitless. After being valued by Yang San, Wu Tsong brought enough money to the Ili area to start his work. Hoboksari was one of his main targets. According to Yang San, the sixth young master was a great emperor. He was particular about not doing anything, but when he did, he would amaze the world with a single brilliant feat. Once the enemy made a move in the Ili area, he had to do his best to get rid of them. With this principle in mind, Hoboksari, which was the route to the north, naturally became a top priority. Wu Tsong put a part of his energy there. In order to get accurate first-hand information, he didn't hesitate to come to Hoboksari in person. He thought he had done a good job and paid enough attention. But what Wu Tsong didn't expect was that there was another person who beat him to it. That was the sworn enemy of the Security Bureau, the CIA. Chapter 12:10. They had been established relatively late, but with the backing of the seventh Madam, Su Man-er, it meant that they had strong support and backing. In addition, they had opened up another path, and their members were all women, especially beautiful women. This made their abilities and influence not weaker than the Security Bureau. Just like in Hoboksari City, the people from the CIA had the same idea as Wu Tsong and made a move first. Commander Bai, the CIA's team leader, Han Fong, contacted General Mediz before us, and Wu Tsong's report suddenly became a little hesitant. And what? Bai Shuang, who was listening seriously, looked at Wu Tsong in confusion. Although some things were not pleasant to hear, since Bai Shuang asked, Wu Tsong could only tell him the truth. And team leader Han Fong has changed her name to Madanezer. She will be married to Mediz tonight. What? Bai Shuang, who was a little surprised, stood up involuntarily and digested the news. He had heard that the CIA would often sacrifice themselves, or even give themselves to others in order to achieve their goals. However, in his opinion, it was just a show. After all, in this era, women cherished their bodies and reputation very much. However, he did not expect it to be true. Looking at Wu Tsong's embarrassed expression, it was obvious that the truth of the matter was not to be doubted. Bai Shuang, who was extremely surprised, took a while to calm himself down. Team leader Wu, tell me more about Han Fong. Yes. After Wu Tsong agreed, he explained the situation in detail. According to him, Han Fong was not a Han. Instead, she was an authentic Zybe. She was born in an ordinary family, but because of her beauty, she could sing and dance since she was young. In the age of war, it was always difficult for women to find a good home. Han Fong's family was also drifting and difficult to settle down. Later on, when the origin city was established, it attracted the attention of many people of other races. The peaceful living environment, rich material and cultural life there attracted many knowledgeable people, and Han Fong was one of them. Because of her beauty, when she just turned 18, she was engaged to a new deputy battalion officer in Shecheng. Finally, her life was stable. However, the heavens were unpredictable. Her husband actually went to the battlefield and died in the battle with Ili Bali. She once again became a rootless duckweed. Fortunately, the 5-star army took good care of the families of martyrs, so she didn't have to sleep on the streets again. However, the quality of her life was also very different from before. It was at this time that an intelligence agent from the CIA took a fancy to her and recruited her into the organization. Later, with her outstanding performance, she became one of the core members of the organization. This time, when Han Fong heard that they were going to mobilize troops against Ili, she wanted to avenge her husband, so she naturally signed up. Because of her outstanding performance, She was appointed as the team leader. That was how she got in touch with Medes first, but she didn't expect that she would take the risk herself. You said that she is the wife of a deputy battalion commander in the new army? After Bai Shuang heard this, he had a general understanding of the matter. However, when he thought about how this person was a family member of a 5-star army officer, and now, in order to complete his mission, he had to submit himself to the enemy's general. Naturally, he felt indignant. Yes. Wu Bun answered without daring to conceal anything. How bold of you. Don't you remember what the teacher said? No one can force the families of martyrs to do anything. The CIA dared to do this. Aren't they afraid that the teacher will punish them? At this moment, Bai Shuang was so angry that his face was red. Even if the CIA's backer was the 7th madam, so what? In Bai Shuang's eyes, he couldn't use the families of martyrs as an excuse. Otherwise, it would make the officers and soldiers very sad. With Wu Tsong's status, he naturally didn't dare to voice out his doubts. 7th madam was an existence that a nobody like him couldn't afford to offend. If he really said something unpleasant, once it spread out, he was afraid that his head would be separated from his body. Not only could he not question it, but he also had to try his best to absolve it. It was not for anything else, but because he had to tell the truth. Commander Bai, I'm afraid it's not what you think. I've seen Han Feng once, and she also took the initiative to tell me that no one forced her to do what she did. Everything she did was voluntary. Voluntary? After Bai Shuang heard this, he didn't understand. I'm afraid she had no choice but to say that. After all, there are some people that a little girl like her can't afford to offend. It doesn't seem like it. Wu Tsong didn't know how to explain it, so he could only say what he felt. He could also see that Bai Shuang was very angry about this matter. This was one of the students that Bugnam of Gojoseon valued very much. On the other side was Bugnam of Gojoseon's 7th madam. He couldn't afford to offend either of them. Once the matter got out of hand, he didn't know if others would be in trouble, but it was very likely that he would be the first to be in trouble. After all, he only had the director of the Security Bureau, Yang San, behind him. Not to mention, his identity in the entire Security Bureau wasn't considered an important person. Even if Wu Tsong wanted to protect his own safety, he had to try his best to smooth things over. However, looking at Bai Shuang's angry appearance, he felt that the matter wouldn't be so easy to solve. That's enough. After this matter is settled, I will personally go and ask Han Feng. If she is willing, I will naturally not be able to say anything. However, if someone wants to force her, regardless of who is behind her, I will report this matter to teacher and demand an explanation. Bai Shuang could feel Wu Tsong's difficulty. In fact, he didn't want to offend the 7th madam because of other people's matters. However, since he encountered this matter, he would ask for justice. Wasn't this what Yang Chendong usually taught them? Putting this matter aside for the time being, Bai Shuang asked Wu Tsong. You're saying that tonight is the day Medes marries Han Feng? Then he will definitely hold a big banquet. Yes, now in the city of Hobok Seli, everyone with status has received an invitation. Well, Leader Wu, I'll have to trouble you to get me an invitation too. Bai Shuang nodded, his eyes revealing a terrifying sharpness. He had already investigated everything, and had a perfect plan to take action. However, now he had to take action early. He was afraid that if he was late, the martyr's widow would be humiliated. This was definitely something he didn't want to see and couldn't accept. Wu Tsong faintly guessed Bai Shuang's intention, but he couldn't refuse. The orders from above were for him to cooperate unconditionally. He could only sigh in his heart and clasped his fist. Please don't worry, Leader Bai. The invitation will be sent soon. With Wu Tsong's ability and the group under him operating in Hobok Seli for a while, it was just an invitation. It wasn't that complicated. In the afternoon, the invitation was sent to Bai Shuang. Considering that it was a banquet and not a battle, Bai Shuang didn't bring too many people. He only chose 4 elite warriors to follow him. At the same time, after making some arrangements for the people staying in the inn, when night came, he excitedly went to the general's mansion in the city. Medes' mansion was now brightly lit and bustling with activity. Medes, who was already in his 40s, already had a main wife and 4 concubines. Normally, There was no need to make such a big fuss when he was marrying a concubine. Moreover, it just so happened that the 5-star army was attacking, so everything should be done in a low-key manner. However, Medina Nazar had requested for a grand celebration. She claimed that she was getting married, and this was the happiest time in a woman's life. Of course it had to be grand. Moreover, wouldn't such a grand wedding be able to achieve the purpose of consolidating and stabilizing the hearts of the people in the city? Mediz was speechless when he heard that. He thought about it and agreed. Of course, this was also the reason why he was drooling over her beauty. He had been in Ely for a long time, and had seen many women, but this was the first time he had seen someone as beautiful as Madanazar. If such a beauty had any request, as long as it was within his capabilities, he would naturally agree to it with a nod. Thus, there was such a lively scene. There were people coming and going in the courtyard of the general's mansion. There were all kinds of people wearing luxurious clothes, chatting in groups of 3 to 5. Bai Shuang, who was dressed like a wealthy merchant, also wore a set of luxurious clothes that the concubine had gotten him as he walked in the courtyard. He had a smile on his face, showing his friendly and amiable side. However, if one were to observe him closely, they would notice that his eyes were always looking into the distance from time to time. That was because he was observing the structure of the houses here, thinking about the best place to strike if he were to make a move. The original plan was to first figure out the military layout in the city, then take control of Mediz. This was double insurance. However, because of the matter with Hanfang, he had to make a move in advance, so he had to be careful. There were more and more people in the courtyard. Roughly counting, there were no less than 300 people, and they were either rich or respectable people. If this was the case, it was likely that almost all the people with some status in the city had arrived. Bai Shuang walked alone in the courtyard, shuttling through the crowd. His eyes even looked at the courtyard to the side. That was where all the followers were staying. As if he was walking casually, Bai Shuang came to a place very close to this courtyard, so that he could send out a signal and lure out 4 elite soldiers to help him. The sky was completely dark, and the auspicious time had arrived. The originally noisy courtyard quickly quieted down. In the direction of the main hall, the 7-foot-tall Mediz finally appeared. Just from his appearance, this person had a tall and sturdy physique, and was also a fierce general. It was a pity that the beard on his face made him look too old. When the bride Madanazar appeared beside him with the help of her maidservant, the contrast between the two was even stronger. Chapter 12:11. Ha ha ha. Thank you all for coming. As the host, Mediz laughed heartily. After greeting everyone, he introduced her to everyone. This is my new concubine, Madanazar. Please say a few words to everyone. Aya, the general is so lucky. The general's charm is amazing, that's why the beauty likes him. The general is very brave. If I were the beauty, I would choose him too. Yes, this is what it means to be a beauty with a hero. I've finally seen this scene, ha ha. Immediately, the compliments came one after another. When Mediz heard it, he laughed even more heartily. It was truly a joyous scene. The compliments and bootlicking continued, but soon, a sweet and clear voice stopped. Madanazar spoke. Hello everyone, I'm Madanazar. Thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you. Aya, madam, there's no need to be so polite. This is what we should do. Yes, the general protects our safety. Now that he's happy, it's only right that we come to congratulate him. Following that was another wave of disgusting flattery. Mediz did not reject any of it and accepted it all. At that moment he was very happy. He could not only get the beauty, he could also use this opportunity to receive a big gift. No matter how he thought about it, he was very happy. The flattery continued in the crowd. Someone started to make a fuss, and asked the two to drink cross-cupped wine. Cross-cupped wine had long been spread from the great Ming Dynasty. This was a new thing that Yang Chendong started, and it was quickly accepted by the crowd. Hearing this, Mediz naturally did not reject it. He laughed and said, All right, let's drink. Men, bring the wine. There was no goblet or glass. Such an expensive item was simply out of reach. She brought over 2 exquisite porcelain cups and filled them with white wine. Then, she handed them to Mediz and Madanazar respectively. Then, under the watchful eyes of the crowd, a man and a woman, one old and one young, intertwined their arms together. This scene also attracted the cheers of many onlookers. Unlike everyone else, Bai Shuang, who was hidden in the crowd, was ready to send out a signal. He would not allow himself to see a martyr's widow begging the enemy's general, even though doing so would greatly reduce his chances of success. After all, most of the 300 elite soldiers he brought were outside the general's residence. There were only 4 soldiers inside the residence. Even so, he still wanted to rush out and stop everything. In his eyes, this was his mission, the mission of an ordinary 5-star army officer. Of course, he had to admit that Han Feng, who had changed her name to Madenazer, was really beautiful. When he first saw her, even he was stunned. Bai Shuang was ready to act. As soon as he blew the whistle, the 4 elite soldiers would immediately rush into the courtyard with their weapons and kill at will. If possible, it would be best if they could subdue Mediz. Even if it was not possible, he wanted to create chaos here and give the 300 elite soldiers enough time to rush in and surround everything. Bai Shuang, who had already made up his mind and was about to blow the whistle, suddenly stopped. What happened next was completely out of his expectations. Madenazer, who was drinking wine, suddenly had a shiny dagger in her left hand. At this moment, she was pressing it against Mediz's neck. This was a very dramatic scene. Everyone in the courtyard was shocked and stood there as if they were petrified. Even at this moment, many people still did not understand what was happening. Was this a prearranged show? The reason why they said this was because the other main character, Mediz, did not show any signs of panic. On the contrary, his expression was normal. It was as if the target of the dagger was not him, but someone else who had nothing to do with him. The courtyard suddenly became silent. This scene also made Bai Shuang stop what he was doing. He wanted to see what Han Feng was trying to do. Under everyone's attention, Mediz laughed sinisterly. "What's wrong, madam? What are you doing? Don't you know that swords have no eyes? It's easy to hurt people like this, and it's even easier to hurt yourself." As he spoke, Mediz raised his left hand to remove the dagger from his neck. However, at the same time, a pleasant voice sounded. "Don't move. Let me tell you, this dagger has been infected with a strong poison. If you're cut by it, I guarantee that you'll lose your life in an instant. If you want to live, you have to listen to everything I say." Strong poison? Hearing this, everyone in the courtyard could not help but panic. At this moment, everyone clearly saw that this was not a prearranged show. This madam really wanted to take Mediz's life. They didn't expect that the new concubine, who was supposed to be brought to the boudoir and waiting to enter the bridal chamber, would have such a fierce side. Everyone was shocked, and at the same time, they were even more curious about how General Mediz would deal with this situation. Strong poison? Maicai was surprised, but he wasn't as scared as everyone thought. Instead, he laughed. "Beauty, don't joke with me. Do you really think I'll believe you just because you made up a random reason?" Maicai was stunned for a moment, but he wasn't as scared as everyone thought he was. "You don't believe me? Then try it if you can." Medina was very confident when she said these words, giving people a feeling that she was very sure of herself. After hearing this tone, everyone could not help but believe it. Only Mediz laughed and said, "I don't believe you. Try it if you can." After saying that, he deliberately moved his neck forward and touched the tip of the dagger. The dagger was indeed sharp. With just a touch, it left a bloody mark on Mediz's neck. This shocked Medina, who was holding the dagger, and she could not help but let go of the dagger. She did not want to take Mediz's life. At least, she did not want to take his life before she completed the mission. A dead general was far less important than a living general who could listen to her orders. However, the plan could not keep up with the changes. Not only did Mediz not believe her, he even tried to test the dagger with his own body. At this moment, she was caught off guard. Everything did not go according to plan. She only felt that her mind was blank. In the eyes of everyone, Medina's performance was not a big deal. Instead, they were shocked by General Mediz's courage. Only Bai Shuang, who was in the crowd, had a bad feeling. This was not the time to be distracted. Just as Bai Shuang was about to warn Mediz, the moment Medina let her guard down, Mediz made his move. His right arm that was holding the wine suddenly loosened. When the bowl fell to the ground, his right hand freed up to grab the dagger. The tables had turned in an instant. Medina was stunned. But what she didn't expect was that as the porcelain cup fell to the ground, there was a crisp sound, and nearly 100 Turpan soldiers suddenly swarmed into the courtyard. As soon as they appeared, they surrounded Madenazer and her maidservants tightly. Mediz, who was already outside the circle, shouted loudly again. "Ha ha ha, you dare to use such a little trick against me? I'm afraid you don't know that I've already replaced the dagger in your hand. Ha ha ha, do you think I'm a 3-year-old kid who can be easily fooled by you? You said you were born in Hobokseli. I've already sent people to investigate. There's no such thing. Tell me, why did you lie to me like this?" Mediz's words left Madenazer's mouth, and she was stunned again and again. Just a moment ago, she thought she was exposed. She thought he knew her identity. But now it seemed that Mediz did not know. He only found the problem from her fabricated background. So it did not affect the overall situation. Although the current situation was very unfavorable for her, Medina wasn't afraid. Even if she died, it wouldn't be considered as a failure of the mission. In that case, she would die a worthy death. Medina's expression gradually returned to normal when she realized that her actions had not spoiled the overall situation. Her voice rang out again. "Mediz, you're a scumbag. I'm only here to avenge my personal grudge. Now that you've seen through me, I'll let you do whatever you want to me." As she spoke, Medina purposely puffed out her chest, and at the same time, removed the veil covering her face. Madenazer was already very beautiful. Even a thin veil was unable to hide her beauty. Now that she was gone, her true appearance was completely exposed to everyone, causing waves of exclamations to erupt from the crowd. Following her action, a commotion broke out in the courtyard. Some of the maids who were pouring wine for the officials and nobles suddenly had short knives in their hands. Then they slashed in all directions, causing chaos. It was obvious that this was Medina's backup plan. The signal to take action was to remove the veil. This scene also caused chaos. Even Bai Shuang, who was in the crowd, was targeted by a maid. However, he did not attack. Instead, he cleverly dodged and used this opportunity to move to the front of the main hall. "How dare you touch my guest? Take her down." Mediz's face turned ugly at this moment. He knew that this woman wouldn't have simply prepared a poison dagger. Now it seemed like he was right. Fortunately, he was prepared. He called over 100 soldiers. When he shouted, the soldiers surrounded the maids in the courtyard. Chapter 12:12. There were less than 10 maids in total, and they were all intelligence agents of the CIA. Some of them were only on the periphery, and their training was limited. The only reason they could create chaos earlier was because of the daggers in their hands. Now that they were facing the Turkmen soldiers armed with spears and swords, they had no advantage at all. They were about to be surrounded. Taking advantage of the chaos, Bai Shuang easily made his way to the front of the hall. He estimated the distance with his eyes, then whistled loudly. With a leap he landed beside Madenazer. Suddenly, a shadow appeared and landed beside her. Madenazer instinctively wanted to retreat, but at the same time, she heard a soft voice. "Don't panic. I am Bai Shuang, the commander of the 4th Regiment of the 5th Star Army's 1st Cavalry Division. If you want to live, follow me closely." Before he could finish his sentence, Bai Shuang's right hand reached for his waist, and a flexible sword appeared in his hand. He thrust it at Madenazer, who was 2 meters away from him. Although they were both assassins, Madenazer and Bai Shuang were not on the same level. The difference between them could be described as heaven and earth. With just one stab, Madenazer's right arm was injured, and he couldn't help but cry out in pain. Madenazer was a weak woman, and Madenazer was nothing to him. Therefore, he thought he was the safest. He didn't expect Bai Shuang to appear out of nowhere and use such a sharp sword technique. His right arm was injured because of a moment of carelessness. Out of instinct, the injured Madenazer retreated while shouting at the Turkmen soldiers around him. "Men, take them down! Take them down!" Bai Shuang appeared too quickly, and the speed of his sword was too fast, so the soldiers didn't react in time. Now that the general's voice was heard, the ordinary soldiers immediately responded and rushed towards Bai Shuang. In a short period of time, no less than 30 soldiers had come here. This was all thanks to the 4 elite soldiers who had appeared after hearing the whistle. They had shared some of the firepower. Otherwise, there would have been even more people coming to surround and capture them. Bai Shuang's expression turned serious. He turned to Madanazar and asked, "How is it? Are you scared?" "No." Although Madanazar's body was trembling, she still answered bravely, "Then, since you're not afraid, let's start a massacre here today." "Huh?" Bai Shuang laughed as she reached her left hand into her pocket. She took out a Type 54 pistol and 2 magazines and handed them to Madanazar. "Do you know how to use this?" "This is a pistol. I've learned how to use it before, but I'm afraid I can't shoot accurately." Madanazar's eyes lit up when she saw the object handed to her. "It's fine. They're so close. Even if we can't beat them to death, we'll scare them to death. All right, I'm going to make my move. Remember to follow me closely." After Bai Shuang finished speaking in a short amount of time, the soft sword in his right hand shook. It turned into a long dragon and suddenly thrust forward. Fighting 1 against 30 was already a test for White Shuang, not to mention that there was a weak woman behind him that needed to be protected. But even so, he would not back down. This was his duty as a professional soldier, and more importantly as a man. With a roar, Bai Shuang stepped forward and stabbed out with his sword, striking the chest of a Turfan soldier. The sword was pulled out, and blood spurted out. The soldier on the other side fell to the ground. 1. Bai Shuang's lips moved slightly as he spoke softly. Madanazar, who was behind him, heard everything. She was shocked and blushed. Bai Shuang's entire body was emitting a masculine scent. She, who was very close to him, felt the same way. Swoosh. Bai Shuang thrust out his sword again, then pulled it back. 2. Bang. After a deafening gunshot, Madanazar's voice rang out. 3. "Aha, well done." Bai Shuang praised from the bottom of his heart. Then, his long sword danced like a snake, forming an impenetrable net to kill the enemy and protect himself at the same time. Bai Shuang's sudden appearance made the already chaotic situation even more chaotic. Many of the officials and nobles who came to celebrate saw the bloody scene. They screamed and ran out of the courtyard. But they quickly retreated, not for any other reason, but because there were countless black-clothed soldiers rushing in from the outside. As these people rushed in, firecrackers were set off outside the general's mansion. This was Wu Tsong's masterpiece. They wanted to use the sound of firecrackers to cover up the sounds of killing in the general's mansion. The 290 elite soldiers of the 5-star army who stayed outside finally arrived. As soon as they appeared, their swords danced, and those who stood in their way were either dead or injured. "Stop them! Stop them!" Madanazar, who had been stabbed in the right arm, thought he had the situation under control. He did not expect the enemy to have more people than him. At this moment, his expression became very ugly. He regretted it. If he knew this would happen, he would have taken down Madanazar earlier. Why did he have to put on this show? Fortunately, he was afraid that Madanazar would find out, so he only mobilized 100 soldiers this time. Now it seemed that he had miscalculated. But there was still a chance. For example, he could capture Bai Shuang or Madanazar, and use them to threaten them. There was still a chance to turn the situation around. Immediately he shouted at the soldiers guarding beside him. "Quick charge! Take down this adulterous couple! Take them down!" With this shout, the pressure Bai Shuang faced increased. The number of enemies in front of him increased from a few to more than 10. When these people attacked together, Bai Shuang's left arm was immediately injured. If Madanazar did not fire 2 shots at the critical moment and intimidate some people, Bai Shuang would have been seriously injured. His left arm was still bleeding, but Bai Shuang did not seem to hear it. The soft sword in his hand was still moving back and forth. But after all, it was difficult for 2 fists to fight against 4 palms. The speed of his sword was obviously slower. Quick, he can't take it anymore. Attack together, attack! Seeing that the turning point was right in front of him, Madanazar shouted and raised his sword at the same time. However, he was smart enough not to attack Bai Shuang. His right arm was already injured, and he did not want to repeat the same mistake. This time, he chose to attack Matanazer, who was relatively weak. At this time, Matanazer had already used up all the bullets in her gun. There were more than 20 bullets, but she only killed 3 enemies and injured 4. The rest of the bullets were nowhere to be seen. At this moment, she was anxious because she was holding a gun that had no bullets. At this moment, a long sword was thrust at her face. Matanazer was obviously very angry at this moment. He wanted to destroy this woman's face. The long sword suddenly came at Matanazer while she was at a loss. At this moment, when she saw the sword enlarging in her eyes, she instinctively closed her eyes and waited for her death. Get out of the way. At the critical moment, Bai Shuang noticed the commotion behind him. With a loud shout, he leaped backward. The sword slashed Bai Shuang's back, leaving a palm-sized wound. Ah! The pain on his back caused Bai Shuang to let out a muffled groan. All of this fell into Matanazer's eyes as she was pinned under him. At this moment, the two's posture was somewhat ambiguous. Their breaths were so close that they could easily feel each other's breath. This made Matanazer's face blush. But when she thought of the current situation, she asked with concern, "Are you okay?" "I'm not dead yet." Bai Shuang endured the pain and replied. Then he grabbed Matanazer and flipped her one by one. After he did that, he dodged the sword in Matanazer's hand. Matanazer's face was filled with anger after he failed to subdue the two of them. He roared and charged at Bai Shuang again with his sword. But as soon as he stepped forward, a soft sword flew at him, forcing him to take 3 steps back to avoid the attack. The soft sword was thrown by Bai Shuang. At this moment he had no weapon in his hand. After a bitter smile he hugged Matanazer and said, "Fine, I'll die. I won't be lonely if I can die with a beauty in my arms." "Is that so? Am I a beauty?" Matanazer blushed when she heard Bai Shuang's words. This. Bai Shuang was just expressing his feelings. When he thought of Matanazer's identity as the widow of a 5-star army officer, he immediately shut his mouth. He would never do something like blasphemy. Seeing that Bai Shuang didn't answer, Matanazer pouted. She then whispered, "To be able to die together with the general, this little girl is content." The voice wasn't very clear, but since they were so close, Bai Shuang still heard it clearly. His face immediately turned red. Matanazer saw this scene and couldn't help but laugh. Whoosh whoosh whoosh, a few arrows were fired. The elite soldiers of the 5-star army finally rushed into the courtyard and attacked Matanazer, who was standing in front of the hall. Dozens of soldiers died one after another. Even Matanazer himself was hit by 2 arrows. After he fell to the ground, the situation was settled. The inside and outside of the general's mansion were under the control of the 5-star army. They had taken a risk, but they had actually succeeded. Aside from luck, the most important reason for their success was Matanazer's plan. Her idea was simple. First, she would control Matanazer, then use his mouth to control the upper echelons of the city. Then, she would create chaos from the bottom to prepare for the arrival of the 5-star army. Her plan was generally feasible, but it wasn't perfect. Bai Shuang's arrival helped her perfect everything, making what happened next seem like a miracle. Chapter 12-13. Under the blades of the 5-star army. Those who were afraid of death and wanted to live all lowered their heads and promised to cooperate fully. This included General Mediz, who looked very brave just a moment ago. There was no other way. When his sword cut into White Shuang's back, it was so deep that it exposed the bone. Seeing their regiment commander suffer such an injury, the soldiers under him naturally wouldn't be kind to him. They would use whatever method was effective. In just a short while, this general who had lived a comfortable life for many years lowered his head and surrendered. With the help of these high-ranking officers, after their letters were sent to their subordinates through the 5-star army, Hobok Seri City no longer had any defenses. A bright light shot out from within the city. The 20,000 cavalrymen of the world's 1st Division who had been lying in ambush in the city entered from all 4 sides, achieving their goal of occupying this border city, without shedding a single drop of blood. Someone, report to the 6th young master that we have occupied Hobok Seri City without any losses. Next, we will move from the north to the south, leaving the Ayla mountain pass, and marching towards the capital city of Ely. Riding on his horse, Division Commander Tion, who laughed as he spoke to the reporter. Then he looked at the 4 regimental commanders and said, let's go take a look at the injured hero regimental commander. Haha, let's go. Taimur and the other 3 laughed. They weren't here to laugh at White Shuang, nor were they gloating over his injury. It was just that getting injured was a common occurrence for them. Sometimes, getting injured was even a symbol of honor. With Division Commander Tion, who was the leader, the 5 of them each brought some elites and went straight to the general's mansion. This was now White Shuang's temporary place to recuperate. After the 5 of them entered the courtyard, other than seeing the strict security, they also saw a beautiful figure carrying a basin of clear water towards the back of the mansion. Her voice was as clear as an oriole's. I'm going to change the regimental commander's dressing. No one is allowed to disturb him. Don't worry, Miss Han. The 5-star army soldier in charge of guarding the place nodded solemnly. He almost patted his chest and promised. Without noticing Tion, who and the others behind her, the woman strode towards the backyard, leaving the crowd outside dumbfounded. This girl's figure isn't bad. I saw her side profile just now and she's very pretty. Commander Bai is in luck this time. The 3rd commander, Uboer, chuckled and said. It's said that beauties love heroes. I've heard that Commander Bai saved a very beautiful woman during this mission. Now it seems like it's true. Sigh, I knew there was such a good thing, so I rushed over. An envious voice sounded. The one who said this was the 5th Regiment Commander Gongfeng, who was also single. Everyone was joking about this matter. Since the woman had said that she was going to change Bai Shuang's bandages, and it was not appropriate for others to disturb her, no one would be so bored as to go and visit her now. Using this opportunity, everyone became interested in that beautiful woman, especially Division Commander Tion, who, in the 5-star army, other than the Cold Vanguard Army, the other armies, divisions, and regiments didn't have political commissars. This meant that the main commander had to take care of all matters. It must be said that Bai Shuang wasn't young anymore. It was about time for him to get married and have children. Tion, who was very concerned about this matter, felt that the opportunity had come. It wasn't that he hadn't asked Bai Shuang before, and he had asked as both a superior and a friend. However, Bai Shuang didn't give an accurate answer. In his words, the war was urgent and personal matters could be discussed later. However, only Division Commander Tion who knew that this was because he hadn't met the right person. Now that there was such an opportunity, he obviously wanted to find out more about her. You come here. Tion, who pointed at the soldier guarding the backyard and waved his hand. Division Commander, what are your orders? The soldier had already noticed Tion, whose group. However, since the division commander didn't ask, they couldn't take the initiative to speak. This was a military rule of the 5-star army. Let me ask you, what is the name of the woman just now? What is her background? What is her identity? Do you know? Tion, who asked a series of questions the moment he opened his mouth. From this, it could be seen that he was already very concerned about this matter. Reporting to division commander, this woman's name is Han Fong. The soldier was one of the 4 warriors who followed Bai Shuang. He knew some of the things that he knew more clearly. He immediately said everything he knew. At this moment, it wasn't only Tion who was listening. The other 4 commanders were also listening. When they heard that although this woman was beautiful, she was once the widow of a vice-commander of the new army, they couldn't help but shake their heads helplessly. It wasn't that they looked down on widows, nor did they have any thoughts of this woman bringing bad luck to her husband. It was just that she was a military widow. Out of respect, it was clearly inappropriate for her to marry Bai Shuang. So it's like this. After Tion, who finished listening to the soldier's detailed report, he waved his hand and dismissed him. At the same time, he frowned and seemed to be deep in thought. He said, Men, send a telegram to the 7th Madam of Crimson City. Ask her about the specific situation of this woman called Han Fong. Send a telegram to the 7th Madam. Tion, whose action caused the other 4 commanders to be shocked. Then the 2nd commander Lu Duo kindly reminded him, Division Commander, It's not good to trouble the 7th madam for such a small matter. Also, this woman's identity isn't suitable for Commander Bai. This so-called unsuitable could be divided into 2 types. The first was out of respect. The second was due to the difference in status. Bai Shuang was the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division. He was also the student of the 6th Young Master. Although he was only a commander, if he left here and became a division commander somewhere else, he would be a great general who could take charge of a region. How could Tian-Hu not understand this logic? However, he still firmly said, disturbing the 7th madam shouldn't be a problem. We're doing this for the sake of fairness. Also, even if we want to give Commander Bai an explanation, there are some issues that need to be investigated. Go. After a full hour, Han Feng's delicate figure appeared. She was still holding a basin of water, but it was no longer clear. Instead, it was dyed red with blood. When she came out, she saw Tian-Hu and the others. Although they didn't know each other before, the Major General's star on his shoulder was very eye-catching. Immediately, Han Feng hurriedly knelt on the ground, looking like she wanted to pay her respects. Miss Han, there's no need to be so courteous. You know that our 5-star army doesn't like this. Tian-Hu hurriedly spoke out to stop her. At the same time, he sized up Han Feng's body. Then he nodded, looking very satisfied. Many thanks for General's understanding. Han Feng, who had already changed back to her name, bowed slightly and said with gratitude, no need to be so polite. Oh right, how is Commander Bai now? Can we go visit him now? Tian-Hu finally remembered the important matter and asked Han Feng. At the same time, he tightly grasped the investigation telegram that he had just received. It must be said that telegrams were very convenient. When the telegram was sent to the 7th madam, she found out that it was from the 1st Cavalry Division. Naturally, she attached great importance to it. Soon Han Feng's situation was reported back. Because of this, Tian-Hu was even more certain of one thing. Of course you can. Commander Bai's situation is already much better. Generals, please go ahead and visit him. Han Feng said very politely. Many thanks. Tian-Hu smiled and cupped his fists. Then he led the 4 regimental commanders and strode towards the backyard, leaving behind Han Feng, who looked at everyone's backs with envy. However, not long after, she sighed. Perhaps she thought of her own identity. In the backyard, Bai Shuang was already sitting up. There was a pillow on his back that perfectly supported his bandaged chest. At this moment, he was reading a military book. When he heard the footsteps outside, he didn't raise his head and said, Miss Han, I'm fine here. If you have something to do, you should go and do it first. Oh my, our Commander Bai is always talking about Miss Han. It seems that he really does miss her. Gong Feng's voice sounded from outside the door. As 2 regimental commanders who had joined the 1st Cavalry Division at the same time, their relationship had always been good. They could joke about any kind of thing. Hearing this voice, Bai Shuang was stunned. Then the figures of Tian-Hu and the 4 regimental commanders appeared in his line of sight. He immediately smiled. Out of courtesy, he wanted to get up. Tian-Hu, who was walking at the front, quickly waved his hand. Since you're already injured, why bother with the etiquette? Quickly sit down. Haha. Bai Shuang laughed somewhat embarrassedly. Although he didn't get up, the military book in his hand had already been placed to the side, and his body was much straighter. How are you? Are you all right? The 5 of them each found a place to sit, and asked about Bai Shuang's injury. Bai Shuang, who wasn't injured for the first time, shook his head. I'm fine. I was just stared at by a mosquito. If there's a mission right now, I can still get on the horse. Forget it. Do you really think that our 1st Cavalry Division doesn't have anyone else? Do you think we need an injured regimental commander to charge into battle? The other regimental commanders immediately laughed and joked. Although the 6 of them met to visit Bai Shuang, they quickly talked about military matters. Bai Shuang also knew that the 1st Cavalry Division was going to head to the Ala Mountain Pass and prepare to attack the capital city of Ely. Unfortunately, Hobok Seri City needed someone to temporarily guard it until Yang Qindong's troops took over the defense line. As the injured Bai Shuang, he naturally had to take on this task. This was naturally to take care of Bai Shuang. Bai Shuang couldn't say anything about this. What, were they really going to let him, an injured regimental commander, go with the army? If so, which regiment should he leave behind to guard it? He had just made a great contribution, so he had to give the other regimental commanders a chance to perform. Chapter 12-14. After weighing the pros and cons, Bai Shuang resolutely agreed. At this moment, the other 4 regimental commanders all breathed a sigh of relief. Obviously, they were still somewhat worried that Bai Shuang would disagree. In this way, one of them would have to stay behind. Bai Shuang, you don't have to worry too much. The 6th young master has already sent a telegram. The team sent from the logistics camp of the first city has already passed Yiji. It won't be long before they arrive at Hobokseri City and switch with you. Take this opportunity to have a good rest and train the army at the same time. Now that each of your regiments has doubled the number of soldiers, the combat effectiveness must be improved correspondingly. Otherwise, we will fail to live up to the 6th young master's expectations of us. Division Commander Tian, who comforted him loudly. Yes, thank you for your concern, Division Commander and brothers. Bai Shuang smiled. He really wanted to train the army well, especially the army's coordination and combat ability. It was just that they had not had a good rest since the expansion. They could only train during the journey. Now that there was an opportunity, of course he had to seize it. After they finished talking about the important matters, more than half an hour had passed. There were many things to do in the army. After the 4 regimental commanders looked at each other, they all got up and left. However, Division Commander Tian, who did not leave with the crowd for the first time. Instead, he watched the 4 regimental commanders salute him and leave one by one. When there were only 2 people left in the room, Bai Shuang asked curiously, Division Commander, is there anything else or a mission? There are things, and there are also missions. But before that, I want to ask you something first. Tian, who said with a serious face. Bai Shuang's face immediately became a lot more serious. Yes, Division Commander, please give the order. Okay. After Tian, who made a sound of agreement, he looked at Bai Shuang, who had a solemn expression, and asked a question that was completely unexpected and unexpected. What is your impression of Lady Hanfang? Stunned. For nearly 10 breaths, Bai Shuang did not answer. He sat there in a daze as if he was struck by lightning. It was not until Tian, who coughed softly again, that he seemed to remember something and said, Division Commander, are you? Did you ask the wrong question? I'm telling you, no. I'm talking to you on behalf of the division leader. Be serious. Tian, who also knew that asking him to talk about this issue was a bit too much, but he had no choice. He thought about it for a while, and other than himself, there was no one else in the 1st Cavalry Division who was suitable to talk about this matter. If it were any other guild leader, the situation would only be worse, and the situation would become even more awkward. Tian, who suddenly became so serious that Bai Shuang had no choice but to face this problem. However, he was very clear about Hanfang's situation. After all, she was the widow of a new battalion commander. Just based on this point alone, he couldn't have any other thoughts. Otherwise, it would be a form of disrespect to a martyr who had died. So after hesitating for a long time, he only opened his mouth and said, Lady Han is a good lady, but that's enough. You just need to know that she's a good girl. Tian, who was waiting for this sentence. Of course, if he continued, then the situation would change. After saying this, he continued to ask in depth. Guild leader Bai Shuang, please answer this question seriously. Remember, I'm not asking you now. I'm asking you on behalf of the 1st Cavalry Division's division commander. If Lady Hanfang were to be your wife, would you be willing? What? That's impossible. When Bai Shuang heard this, he hurriedly waved his hands, as if there was a wild beast in front of him. He had no choice but to refuse. Why is it impossible? Is it because she was once engaged to a deputy battalion commander of the new 1st Army? Tian, who suddenly raised his voice as he asked this question. Yes. Bai Shuang didn't completely understand the meaning of this sentence, because at this moment, his mind was already blank. Although he indeed had a good impression of Lady Hanfang, he definitely wouldn't do anything to betray a comrade for his own selfish reasons, even if that comrade had already died on the battlefield. Tian, who was very satisfied with Bai Shuang's answer. He continued to ask, "Then if I tell you that even if you marry Lady Hanfang now, you won't betray anyone, will you still refuse?" At this moment, Bai Shuang finally raised his head, as if he understood something. He looked at Tian Hu and asked, "Senior brother, what's going on?" The reason why he called him senior brother was because both of them studied under Yang Qindong. This kind of address was only used when there were no outsiders. "What's going on?" "Haha, you're lucky." Tian Hu, who had a serious face just a moment ago, was now full of smiles. "Let me tell you, I've already investigated. The person who asked was the 7th madam, and she's already given a reply. Lady Hanfang was indeed engaged to a new battalion commander, but it was only a verbal agreement. There wasn't even a ceremony, and they didn't even enter the bridal chamber. Unfortunately, that officer had already died on the battlefield. Now Lady Hanfang is a free person, and the CIA has also confirmed this. She has the freedom to pursue a happy marriage, and it doesn't involve any moral or emotional issues. Do you understand now?" Tian Hu's words stunned Bai Shuang. After a long while he asked with a face full of joy, "Is this true? If I marry her, it won't be a moral issue, and I won't be letting down that dead battalion commander, right?" "Of course not. Actually, even if there really is something going on with that battalion commander, so what? Teacher said a long time ago that Han people can pursue freedom of love, freedom of marriage. Think about it. Didn't teacher's 6th sister divorce someone else? But isn't she still living very well with Chief Long of the Ministry of Public Security? Not to mention, Lady Hanfang and that battalion commander haven't done anything yet. Of course, your worries aren't without problems. I want to tell teacher about this matter, and let him make a decision. If we have teacher's approval, then there won't be any problems," Tian Hu said with a face full of confidence. Bai Shuang couldn't help but feel nervous when he heard that he was going to disturb Yang Qindong. Teacher is very busy every day. It's not good to trouble him over such a small matter. What's not good about it? Let me tell you, the last time I saw teacher, he asked me about your marriage. We will grow old one day, and our descendants will need to do a lot of things on the battlefield. Teacher has always supported this. All right, don't act like you're the victim of a bargain. Just tell me what you mean. Tian Hu snorted. He had a look that said, "If you say no, I won't care about this matter." Bai Shuang had a very good impression of Hanfang, especially since he was injured. She had taken care of him in every possible way. In addition, she was not only beautiful, but also brave and smart. Wasn't such a woman suitable to be his wife? It was just that because of her identity, he had been suppressing this thought in his heart. Now that everything was no longer a problem, how could he not agree? He immediately nodded and said, I agree. I'll have to trouble senior brother for everything." Hee. Seeing that the matter was finally settled, Tian Hu nodded happily. "All right, I'll send a telegram to teacher and tell him this good news. As for you, kid, you've already taken care of the girl. If other people aren't willing, then there'll be a joke. This time, you'll be guarding Hobokseri City. Take advantage of this time to do something big. It's best if you can get your eldest son out too. Then good things come in pairs." Hearing Tian Hu's teasing, Bai Shuang also laughed foolishly. As for Hanfang, he was confident that he could convince her because he had a feeling that she liked him. After Tian Hu left, Hanfang walked over. She was a bit worried about his injury. After all, he had suffered it to protect her. However, when White Shuang told her about it, her face was immediately filled with joy. It was said that beauties loved heroes, especially heroes who had saved their lives. In addition, White Shuang was both intelligent and brave, and had the air of a scholarly general. He also had the spirit of a grown man. How could she not be willing? However, the little girl was shy and did not immediately agree. Instead, she ran away shyly. This caused Bai Shuang to laugh loudly behind her. On the official road to Turpan City, an army with a bright flag of the 5-star army was moving forward. Among them, a cavalry unit with black cloaks was especially eye-catching. In the 5-star army, the rank of an officer was very obvious. It could be seen from the military rank, and it could also be seen from the cloak that an individual wore. As for the black cloak, it was usually only worn by those with the position of guild leader. The reason why it was said to be a normal situation was because there was something special about it. The black cavalry that protected Yang Qindong could also wear it. There were 2,000 black cavalry soldiers, and they were all wearing black cloaks. The 1,000 black cavalry that had been selected from Crimson City had finally arrived. Among them, Xiao Vi was the captain of the 1st Brigade, Dao Xiao was the captain of the 2nd Brigade, and Ba Daojiang was the vice-captain of the 1st Brigade due to his outstanding performance. Yang Qindong was in this unit. He was riding a white dragon and wearing a golden battle suit, which made him stand out from the rest. Beside him, Beta Persei was wearing a purple military cloak, which was also very eye-catching. Everyone looked at him with envy. Young master, a telegram from the 1st Cavalry Division. In the carriage behind him, the leader of the telegram team, Wang Shan, sent a telegram to Beta Persei, and then handed it to Yang Qindong. Yang Qindong curiously turned around. Didn't a telegram just arrive not long ago? Why is it here again? Chapter 12:15. With a hint of curiosity, Yang Qindong took the telegram. He didn't think that anything would go wrong. With the combat ability of the 1st Cavalry Division, and the fact that they had just doubled their forces, anyone who wanted to cause trouble for them would have to be prepared to lose their teeth. After receiving the telegram, Yang Qindong quickly scanned the contents of the telegram. Then he burst into laughter. Hee White Shuang, spring has come. Spring is coming? Beta Persei obviously didn't understand the meaning of this sentence. Yang Qindong didn't explain. Instead, after a moment of silence, he said, "Let Wang Shan send a telegram to the 7th Madam to confirm the situation of a girl named Han Fong. Then send a telegram to Tiger's Mane to understand the specific situation of a girl named Han Fong and the battalion commander. Then report it." White Shuang was an orphan. As his teacher, he was no different from his parents. Of course, he had to make the decision for such a big matter. But before that, he had to make things clear. He didn't want to make a mistake. That would be a joke, and it would hurt the two young people's hearts. Yang Qindong gave the order. After the telegram was sent out, there was a quick reply. Obviously, everyone attached great importance to the matter that Bugnam of Gojoseon valued. It didn't take long for the matter of Han Fong to be investigated clearly. It was confirmed that she only had a verbal engagement with the deputy battalion commander, who died in battle. The two of them didn't even meet. Everything was set up by the matchmaker. Later, after the deputy battalion commander died in battle, the matchmaker didn't care about this matter. If it wasn't for the fact that Han Fong valued friendship, very few people would know about this matter. After understanding the details, Yang Qindong immediately waved his pen and approved the marriage between White Shuang and Han Fong. He also allowed them to complete the wedding in Hobox. Not only that, Yang Qindong also ordered a small team of black cavalry to go to Hobox and bring a congratulatory gift. With Yang Qindong's blessing, no one would say anything about this matter. Of course, this wasn't a big deal, at least for Yang Xie's 5th Star Army. As his territory grew larger and his influence grew stronger, the number of officers in the army and the local government increased as well. Marriage was not known to the general public. Unless it was someone with a special status like Bai Shuang, it would not attract Yang Qindong's attention. His attention was now focused on the city of Turpan, which was a few hundred miles away. The intelligence department had already sent word that the Ili Kingdom and Yirkiang Kingdom had sent 30,000 troops each to Tulyafan City, seemingly intending to have a decisive battle with the 5-star army there. "Young master, do we need to urge 4th Master Lu to catch up from behind?" Beta Persei also saw the report and suggested, "There's no need. Do you think they will be stupid enough to let us attack a city after losing 8 miles? 4th Master Lu, it's better for you to escort the food from behind." Yang Qindong waved his hand confidently. The 3 countries actually wanted to fight with his main force. This was something he couldn't ask for more. Originally, he was most worried that he wouldn't be able to find the main force. Once the enemy scattered and implemented harassment tactics, he would have the biggest headache. But now that they wanted a decisive battle, he would fulfill their wish. As long as they could destroy the enemy's main force in one fell swoop, the speed of taking down this place would be much faster and save a lot of time. Send a message to the small Japanese empire in Shurcheng. Hurry up and send the small Japanese empire to the front line. Such a large piece of land needs a lot of people. After Yang Chendong said this to Beta Persei, he looked forward. It wouldn't be long before the land under their feet would be surnamed Yang, and then Han. In order to do it once and for all, the migration of the foreign people was necessary. In the Second World War, Japan had occupied Korea for more than 40 years, and had also been entrenched in the northeast of China for a long time. However, the voices of resistance had never stopped. For this reason, a large number of Japanese troops and forces were involved. What was the reason? Was it just because the Japanese didn't treat them as human beings? This might be the main reason, but it wasn't the only reason. At least for a period of time, Japan had implemented a policy of controlling China with China. As long as the people didn't rebel, they were given a certain amount of security and protection, but the voices of resistance still didn't stop. The reason was that in addition to the backbone of the Chinese nation, the most important reason was that they could get the support and solidarity of the people by fighting on their own land. With these lessons learned from previous mistakes, Yang Chendong had long adopted an extreme method, which was the migration of the people. When all these people were thrown into chaos and changed to a new place, they suddenly had no brothers and sisters around them, no people of the same race. When they were not even familiar with the land under their feet, the so-called voices of resistance would naturally disappear. In short, without a suitable soil for survival, some things could not survive, and some ideas could not grow. Naturally, in order to achieve such a result, one would need to have a large territory to achieve the goal of migration. Obviously, Yang Chendong had such conditions. Now in the Ili region, he was using the same method. He wanted to transfer the people from the other provinces to exchange with the people here, to achieve the effect of completely destroying and strangling the will of the people. Conquer the world and let the Han people live wherever there were people. Wherever there were people, the status of the Han people would be the highest, and all the Han people would be proud of their birth. This kind of slogan was not as simple as just saying. If he wanted to carry it out, it would be incredibly difficult. However, since Yang Chendong had brought the modern army here, he naturally had to do something. Even if he could not do it, he would let his descendants do it. In short, this was the goal that he had worked hard for. Looking at it now, the goal was indeed very big, but it was not impossible. Hadn't he already trampled on many small countries and made them part of the Han people's territory? The Navy was also actively making preparations, especially after taking down the Japanese Empire and capturing who knows how many navies. Now they were very powerful, and it would not be long before they set out to conquer the world. Looking forward to the arrival of that day, Yang Chendong felt that the burden on his shoulders was heavy, but he was not afraid. With a light shout, he rode on the white dragon and led the army straight to Turpan City. Turpan City. At this moment, the whole city was in chaos. People could be seen everywhere on the streets, and from time to time, they would collide with each other. The people were busy moving their valuables out of the city. The soldiers were also busy moving their provisions and military supplies. Everyone was scrambling to get out of the city, as if they would be left behind forever if they were late. In such a chaotic situation, bumping into each other was inevitable. Even if many Turpan people were maintaining order in the city, they still could not alleviate the chaos. How could it be so easy to empty out the capital of Turpan in such a short period of time? Palace. The new king, Hardenbarter, was roaring with a face full of anger. Who was it? Who leaked the news? Investigate, investigate for this king. No wonder Hardenbarter was so angry. He had just made up his mind to withdraw from Turpan City, and the news spread out, causing the people to be in chaos, which affected the withdrawal of the army. The reason why he made this decision was because of the lesson of don't lose Ately. When he learned that the 5-star army had powerful artillery that could flatten an entire city, Hardenbarter knew that the so-called strong city was a joke in the eyes of the enemy. If he still defended the capital, the result would not be much better than don't lose Ately. It must be said that Hardenbarter was worthy of being the king who led the rise of Torpon City. He immediately made a decisive move, which was to withdraw from the city and fight the 5-star army on the grassland. In short, he would not defend the city. Originally, according to Hardenbarter's plan, he would withdraw the army first, and then move the people. But for some reason, the news was leaked, and now the city was in chaos. His plan to withdraw had to be delayed. After a series of roars, someone immediately went out of the palace to investigate the leak of the secret. But in such a chaotic situation, it was not easy to find out who leaked the secret. Not to mention, the people who leaked the secret were from the Yangxia Intelligence Department. They had strong anti-reconnaissance abilities, so it was not easy to find them in a short time. After venting his anger, Hardenbarter's expression seemed to be better. He looked at Daiqin, who was standing in the hall, and waved his hand. "General, how far is the 5-star army cavalry from us?" "My king, the closest, is less than 100 miles. Although he didn't want to answer this question, since the king asked, he could only tell the truth. 100 miles? Ah! Hearing this answer, Hardenbarter's expression froze for a moment. Then he sneered. 100 miles? Even the elite cavalry would take less than half a day to arrive. How many people and resources can we evacuate? Daiqin was also shocked by the speed of the 5-star army cavalry. But as a general, he couldn't be afraid of the enemy. Otherwise, he would be unqualified and incompetent. Even though Daiqin had lost a battle, but as a general, he had never lost his character. Seeing the king in such a difficult position, he hesitated for a moment, then steeled his heart and stood out. "My king, I think there is a way. We can stop the 5-star army cavalry. Didn't the Ili Empire and Yirqiang Empire each send 30,000 cavalry, and have already arrived at our Torpon city? As long as we can work with them, I am confident that we can fight the 5-star army and stop them outside Torpon city." "Oh, really?" Hearing Daiqin's confident words, Hardenbarter's eyes were filled with hope. Chapter 12:16. There shouldn't be a problem. Daiqin's reply was straightforward, but there was one thing he didn't say. If the 3 armies all listened to him, then there wouldn't be a problem. Good. Seeing how confident Daiqin was, Hardenbarter's anger disappeared and he said, "If that's the case, then I'll order you to talk to them. As long as their request isn't too excessive, we can agree to it." "Yes, Your Majesty. But I think we should continue to evacuate the city. After all, Tulyafan City is too close to the 5-star army. No one knows what will happen." After Daiqin received the order, he still gave his suggestion to be safe. "Don't worry, this king will not let our people be threatened. In a while, I will give the order for everyone to withdraw to Kaliushi and rebuild the defensive line there." Hardenbarter naturally did not place all his hopes on the coalition forces, and had already made preparations for this. After knowing that His Majesty had a backup plan, Daiqin could finally relax. He immediately walked out of the palace and headed towards the alliance camp outside the city. Before, the 3 countries had sat down together to discuss. In order to deal with the powerful 5-star army, they had to unite. The result of the discussion was that if one side was attacked, the other 2 countries had to unconditionally provide support. It was just that some words sounded nice, like unconditional support. Then how many people should they send? 100,000 was reinforcements, but who could say 1,000 wasn't reinforcements? The so-called alliance was just to deal with the powerful 5-star army. If there wasn't the 5-star army, the 3 sides would still be in a hostile relationship. If they could defeat the 5-star army and weaken their allies, this was probably everyone's goal. Because of this thought, Daiqin also knew that it wouldn't be easy to convince the 2 allied armies to fight the 5-star army. Ili sent out 30,000 cavalrymen to assist Tulyafan. The general leading them was Wu Liji, who had fought against the Wuda army and suffered a great defeat. Yirqiang sent out 30,000 cavalrymen to assist Tulyafan. The general leading them was called Aleifu. Next, Daiqin wanted to find these 2 generals. As former opponents, they were naturally familiar with each other. Sometimes, they would even work together to deal with the other side. As an acquaintance, the moment they met, Daiqin immediately stated his intentions. Generals, there's no need to say more about the current situation. The 5-star army's target isn't just Turpan. They want the entire region. This time, I hope that we can work together sincerely to defeat the 5-star army and protect the safety of the people of the country behind us. Both Uliji and Alefu silently nodded their heads in response to such pleasing words. No matter what they were thinking, they had to act as if they were working together. The two of them only nodded their heads. This wasn't what General Daichin wanted to see. Feeling the pressure, he took a deep breath and looked at the two of them again. There's a saying in the Han Dynasty that an army can't do without a leader. In order to better stop the 5-star army's cavalry, I think we need to choose a commander. As long as our orders are unified, we will be able to defeat the enemy. If we fight separately, it will only create opportunities for the enemy to defeat us. This involved the power of the army. At this moment, the two generals couldn't remain silent. The skinny but spirited Alefu was the first to speak. General Daichin, who do you think should be the general? Daichin, who was already prepared, said without hesitation, "Of course it is me. This time, you all only sent out 30,000 troops, while I am under the king's orders, leading 40,000 cavalry. I have the most troops, right?" Daichin had to take this position as the general. This directly affected whether or not they could stop the 5-star army's cavalry. He couldn't be at ease leaving it to others. We listen to whoever has the most troops. Based on this, if General Uliji and I work together, we will have 20,000 more cavalry than you. Does that mean you have to listen to the two of us? Alefu was clearly not satisfied with this answer. His words were filled with the smell of gunpowder. You are being unreasonable. Daichin said angrily. Whoever has the most troops is the general. It's also unreasonable. General Alefu didn't back down. Seeing that the two of them were about to quarrel, Uliji, who had been silent, had to step up. Okay, two generals, stop quarreling. The reason why we are here is to discuss how to defeat the 5-star army. Quarreling won't solve the problem. None of us want to lose and be scolded by the king. Humph. Alefu snorted and turned his head to the side. His actions were just like his name, a naughty child. The tent quietened down again. Uliji looked at Daichin and asked, "If it is as you said and we have to listen to your orders, what are you going to do? What benefits can we get?" The three sides agreed that they must unconditionally help the side being attacked. However, from Uliji's words, it was obvious that there were conditions for them to help. This wasn't Uliji's idea. He had just received a secret letter from Prime Minister Arap, which stated that Hoboksari had been taken over by the Pentagram Legion. Now Ilibeli was having a hard time fending for themselves. They couldn't send any more reinforcements to Turpan, and they didn't even have the resources to supply the army. Ulibeli had to think of a solution himself. Because he knew this, Uliji turned his attention to Daichin and started to ask for benefits. Although Daichin was mentally prepared, he was still somewhat dissatisfied after hearing this. However, the king had said before that as long as the request wasn't too excessive, he would try his best to satisfy it. Thus, he suppressed the anger in his heart and asked, "But what kind of benefits does General Uliji require?" "This, the most basic problem of food. You guys have to solve it, right? As for the war horses, you know that we came from afar and can't ask for help from the rear. Of course, if you can satisfy these conditions, my 30,000 cavalry will listen to General Daichin's orders." Uliji stated his conditions. He had no choice. Prime Minister Arap told him to think of a solution himself. What good ideas did he have? He could only turn his attention to Turpan. It wasn't hard to solve the problem of rations, as Tulyufin had a lot of rations. However, Daichin obviously wouldn't agree to solve the problem of war horses. He shook his head and said, "I can give you the rations, but not the war horses. Our country doesn't have a lot of war horses." Hearing that there was no problem with the rations and hearing Daichin say that there were not many war horses, Uliji knew that there was hope. He immediately smiled. General Daichin's words are wrong. A while ago, when the grasslands were in chaos, the Turafan kingdom, which was closest to them, used a lot of rations to exchange for their war horses. If what I said is correct, There are at least 50,000 war horses in the horse field outside of Turfan. How about this? We won't ask for much, just 10,000 war horses from each side. Uli Ji was obviously prepared. When Daichin heard these words, his expression changed. 10,000 war horses is impossible. Although we have some war horses, they are prepared for the old soldiers. You know that after the military restructuring in Turpan, there are many retired soldiers among the people. Once they have war horses and sharp sabers, they can become soldiers again. These are for... Daichin still wanted to continue, but Wu Liji interrupted him. 8,000 war horses. No, at most 3,000. 7,000. 3,500. The two generals, who led tens of thousands of troops, were like two unscrupulous merchants. After a round of bargaining, they finally set the number at 5,000. Since he could get food and 5,000 war horses, Uli Ji felt that he had reached the conditions he was satisfied with. He nodded and said, "Then the 30,000 Ili soldiers I brought will listen to General Daichin." Uli Ji lowered his head. Although Aleifu was unhappy, he only had 30,000 cavalry, so he couldn't do much. In the end, he could only agree. Just like that, the Three Alliance Army was formed. They agreed to follow General Daichin's orders to stop the Five-Star Army at the northeast front line of Turpan. 8 hours later, they had to gather at the designated location. Daichin clenched his fists and left the camp excitedly. He had to report the good news to his king. Only Uli Ji and Aleifu were left in the tent. The latter said unhappily, "General Uli Ji, why did I agree to Daichin's request?" "Haha, General Aleifu, there's no need to be angry. It's not wrong for us to listen to him, but if his request is a little too excessive, we can still refuse, right?" Wu Liji winked at Aleifu and said with a smile. "An excessive order? Oh haha." Aleifu immediately began to laugh loudly. What was too much order? That depended on how he understood it. As long as he was in a bad mood, he could treat any order as too much. After all, they were enemies, so what if he disobeyed? Daichin naturally didn't know what happened after he left. He excitedly went to the palace and reported what he just said to Hardenbarter. Good. Hardenbarter's face was also filled with excitement. "General Daichin, the rest is up to you. As long as you can stop the Five-Star Army's charge, and stop them in the northeast region of Tulafanzai, it won't be long before I can gather the old soldiers again. At that time, we will have a strong force and we can launch a counterattack. I will wait for that day to come," Daichin said excitedly. Chapter 12-17. 70 li outside of Tulyafan City, the new army of the Five-Star Army was gathering here. More than 30,000 cavalrymen came over, covering the sky and covering the earth. They chose a flat area and started cooking. Suhi gave the order for the army to rest on the spot, while the other division commanders came to the main tent to discuss military matters. Inside the tent, Suhi stood in front of a large sand table, waving a stick in his hand. "The scouts at the front sent news that 30 li away from us, there are 40,000 cavalrymen from Tulyafan, 30,000 from Ili Beli and Yirkiang. A total of 100,000 cavalrymen have already set up camp in 3 different camps. Everyone, what do you think we should do next?" When Kulu and the other division commanders heard that there were 100,000 cavalrymen, their eyes all lit up. Clearly, there were so many enemies waiting for them to eat, and they were all very excited. However, at the same time, they knew that even if the 4th Cavalry Division Commander Chang Bo had already handed over the task of transporting the supplies to the 4th Cavalry Division and returned, there were only 30,000 cavalrymen. In terms of numbers, the difference between the two sides was still very large. 30,000 against 100,000, and the other side came prepared, and they were very familiar with the surroundings. No matter how they looked at it, this battle was not going to be easy. No one immediately spoke. Instead, after a moment of contemplation, the 1st Cavalry Division Commander Kulu asked, "General, where is the Liaodong Cavalry Reinforced Unit?" "To the west of us, near Tianshan." Suhi looked at Kulu with a gaze full of admiration. He had already sensed something from this sentence. To the west, The ones guarding the west of Tulyafin should be the Yirkiang Kingdom's army, right? Kalu seemed to have thought of something as he spoke. That's right. Does Commander Ku want the Liaodong cavalry reinforced unit to launch a sudden attack from that direction? Suhi, who had already understood Kalu's intentions, asked with a trace of a smile on his face. The other division commanders' expressions also changed at this moment, and then they began to consider the feasibility of this plan. However, very quickly they all shook their heads lightly. It was clear that they did not think highly of this plan, nor did they have much confidence in it. In reality, everyone knew that the so-called Allied army was only formed because they had no choice but to join forces under certain circumstances. Such an army seemed to have many soldiers and generals, and its momentum was great. However, they also had a fatal flaw, which was that they were not united enough. As long as they found a suitable position, they could completely open up a gap in the shortest amount of time. According to this train of thought, Commander Kalu's decision to choose one of the paths was correct. However, although the idea was good, the difficulty of implementing it was not small. Let's not talk about anything else. Just how strong was the Liaodong cavalry regiment? Everyone was not very clear about it. In addition, they only had 5,000 men, but the Yirkiang army on the west side had 30,000 cavalry. Even if their new army could attract some of their attention, it would be difficult to repel them quickly. If they couldn't end the battle quickly, the enemy would react and they might be surrounded instead. If that was the case, they only had 30,000 cavalrymen. How could they possibly be a match for the enemy's army of 100,000? For them, the best way was naturally to wait for Yang Chendong to arrive. At that time, they would not be at a disadvantage in terms of military strength, and the chances of a large-scale counterattack would be higher. Other than Kalu, the other three division commanders seemed to have reached a consensus. They all shook their heads and looked at Commander Suhi. After expressing their attitude, they waited for the commander's orders. Suhi, who did not immediately make a decision, closed his eyes. How could he not know that this was a risky move? However, he did not want to rely on Yang Chendong and Bugnam of Gojoseon for everything. It was precisely because of the disparity in military strength that if he could win this battle, it would show the strength of the new army. Otherwise, if he had the advantage in military strength, it would be a matter of course for him to win the battle. However, if he made the wrong decision, the new army would face the danger of being surrounded, heavily injured, or even destroyed. He could not make up his mind for the time being. Commander, you make the decision. However, I only want to say one thing. You cannot hesitate before making a decision for a commander. Kalu also knew that Commander Suhi was in a difficult position. If it was him, he would not be able to make a decision. Therefore, he could not rush him. He could only remind him and do his duty as a division commander. As soon as Kalu's words came out, Suhi, whose eyes were closed, could not help but tremble. That's right, he could not hesitate when making a decision for a commander. On the battlefield, opportunities were fleeting. Perhaps he would miss it if he was a little late. Even so, the opportunity was right in front of him. Why should he give it up? The outcome of a war was always changing. No one could know what would happen in the next moment. What a commander needed to do was to do his best in everything in front of him. Since that was the case, why should he not give it a try? The opportunity is right in front of me. I want to give it a try and show the might of the new army. As if he had made a decision, Suhi opened his eyes. When he looked at everyone, there was a hint of excitement and nervousness in his eyes. The five-star army implemented a centralized leadership system. That was, before the battle plan was formulated. The officers below had the right to propose construction. However, the final decision was still in the hands of the highest-ranking officer. When the policy fell to the new army, the one who would have the final say was naturally Commander Suhi. However, this time, Suhi did not make a decision. Instead, he used a negotiating tone to speak to the four division commanders. This showed enough respect and also proved that he was conflicted in his heart. He had not completely made up his mind. Of course, it was also possible that Suhi had already made up his mind. However, it was too risky and could affect the life and death of the four division commanders. That was why he had no choice but to speak with such an attitude. After Su He made his intentions clear, other than Kulu's eyes that lit up, the other 3 division commanders all narrowed their eyes. They did not agree or disagree. Of course, they knew that with Su He's position, he could have made a decision without discussing with them. However, he did not do so. This in itself was a form of respect. Then, how should they respond to this respect? Should they support it? However, if there was a problem, they might lose their lives here. Should they oppose it? It seemed that the fruits of victory were big enough to attract them. Perhaps if they did not do it, they would regret it for a long time or even for a lifetime. Seeing that everyone still did not express their opinions, Su He took a deep breath and said, "Everyone, I will not hide it from you. I have already received news that the new army is about to expand into a new army group. It is very likely that there will be 3 armies and a direct subordinate division. If that is the case, the military strength will reach 100,000 people." Suddenly, Su He threw out such a statement. It seemed to have nothing to do with the current topic, but these words caused everyone's eyes to light up. The new army was going to expand into a new army group. Did that mean that the new army could also be expanded? If that was the case, everyone's position would be promoted by a large level. The number of soldiers they could lead would also increase. It was even possible that they could exchange the 4 stars on their shoulders for a gold star. There was no soldier who did not want to be a general. This was even more so for the 4 division commanders who were only 1 step away from becoming a general. If they wanted to become a general, they had to have enough achievements to convince the masses. Right now, there was a huge contribution in front of them. What would they choose and what would they do? At this moment, everyone was shaken by Su He's words. In the end, Lei Chuandang, the commander of the 3rd Cavalry Division, and Changbo, the commander of the 4th Cavalry Division, both looked at Bai Kai, the commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division. In their eyes, Commander Bai Kai was like his name. He was a very talented person. Feeling the gazes of the 2 division commanders, Bai Kai's heart skipped a beat as he made a decision. "Commander, can we contact Liaodong's strengthening cavalry regiment and see how confident they are to complete this task?" "No problem. Report to Commander Tong Long of the Liaodong Strengthening Cavalry Division." Su He nodded. He also wanted to see the other party's attitude. If they directly refused, then no matter how good his idea was, he would not be able to implement it. In a forest less than 100 miles away from the foot of Tianxia Mountain, people could be seen walking around. This was the temporary base of the Liaodong Strengthening Cavalry Division. From this position, one could vaguely see the high mountains in the distance. As the commander, Tong Long knew that the highest mountain in the distance was Tianshan Mountain. Regiment Commander, Commander Su He of the new 3rd Army sent a telegram. Deputy Regiment Commander Zhao Xing came to Tong Long's side with an excited expression and handed over a piece of paper. Tong Long and Zhao Xing had not been in contact with telegrams for a long time. Before this, they never thought that a small metal box could send a message thousands of miles away. Just based on this point, the 2 of them were shocked. They really didn't dare to imagine how many secrets the 5-star army had, and how powerful Yang Shi was. Luckily, the 2 were adaptable people and quickly accepted this new thing. However, every time they heard a telegram, they could not help but feel excited. Another telegram? As Tong Long spoke, he reached out to take the telegram. When his gaze fell on it, his hands started to tremble uncontrollably. Clearly, the contents of the telegram had made him very excited, even agitated. After a while, Tong Long's voice suddenly rose an octave. "Deputy Commander Zhao, our chance is here. The chance to prove ourselves is here. We must seize it." "Yes, we must seize it." Zhao Xing's face was also filled with excitement. However, he quickly said in a low voice, "But this mission is not easy to complete. If we don't do it well, we will be surrounded and even eaten." Chapter 12:18. That's only one possibility. There's another possibility. Maybe we can make a big contribution? Isn't this the best chance to prove that our Liaodong cavalry has strengthened? Tong Long retorted excitedly. It seemed like he had made up his mind. Even if Zhao Xing didn't agree, he would still do it. "You're the commander. I'll fully support your decisions." Zhao Xing didn't continue to object. Instead, he said something that made Tong Long feel very touched. No one knew better than them the awkwardness of their current status. The so-called Liaodong Cavalry Reinforced Regiment sounded quite impressive, but in reality, ever since they joined the 5-star army, they hadn't fought a decent battle. Although they had some small victories, they were just following the main force to get some military merit. To the ambitious Tong Long and Zhao Xing, this was not what they wanted at all. Both of them were people who dared to fight and fight. They were even people who had thousands of ambitions. In the past, they hated living under the shadow of the Baiming army. In this situation where everything depended on experience and background, it was extremely difficult to stand out. Now that they had joined the 5-star army, they finally had a fair chance to show off their skills. Both of them had been holding back their energy and wanted to show off their skills. However, the 5-star army was different from the Baiming army. There were too many fierce and intelligent generals here. When they fully understood the achievements of other armies, divisions, and commanders, they couldn't help but be shocked speechless for a long time. Wanting to stand out in this kind of army wasn't any easier than being in the Baiming army. After all, the high-ranking officers of the 5-star army were all people who had killed their way through countless battlefields. Whether it was bravery or strategy, they were the best of the best. A true powerhouse would always become stronger when they met someone stronger. Tong Long and Zhao Xing were such people. In their opinion, their biggest disadvantage was that they joined the 5-star army too late. They had too few soldiers in their hands. Once they had a chance to show off their talents, they could also soar into the sky. They just didn't expect the opportunity to appear so quickly. Of course they had to catch him. Under Tong Long's resolute attitude, a reply was quickly sent to the new army's commander, Su He. When he saw the contents of the telegram, Su He couldn't help but laugh out loud. Not bad, 2 tiger generals. Come everyone, take a look. He laughed and handed the telegram to Kulu and the others. Then he heard the 3rd Cavalry Division's commander Lei Chuandong's shocked voice. What? They're actually willing to make a military order. If they can't complete the mission, they'll bring their heads to me. A military order expressed a kind of attitude and a kind of indomitable spirit. Once such a decision was made, there was no way out. Under normal circumstances, no one would rashly choose to do this. Especially this time, it was Commander Su He who asked the other party with an inquiring attitude. He did not request for the other party to express their opinion, but Tong Long and Zhao Xing still made such a decision. This was shocking and admirable. It seems that in terms of courage, we're far inferior to these two. The 2nd Cavalry Division's commander Bai Kai sighed. When he looked at Su He, he straightened his body and said, Commander, the 2nd Cavalry Division supports this battle. Please make a decision. We also support. After Bai Kai expressed his opinion, the other 3 commanders also stood at attention and saluted. Good, I thank you for your support. I'll now report the battle plan to the 6th young master. Su He said with a face full of excitement. He did not forget that the disparity in strength between the two sides was too great. There was a 60% chance of losing, so he had to report it to Yang Chendong. Otherwise, if something went wrong, he would not be able to bear the responsibility even if he killed him. 150 li behind the new army, Yang Chendong was leading the troops forward. He had already received a telegram regarding the situation outside Torpon City, and he knew that there were 100,000 cavalrymen waiting for him. Regarding this, Yang Chendong naturally did not fear them at all, and he had even given the order to speed up. This was because from how he saw it, with just the new army and the Liaodong Cavalry Corps, it would be very difficult to deal with 100,000 cavalrymen. Just as the troops were speeding up, Commander Su He of the new army sent a telegram. After hearing about their request, Yang Chendong's expression became quite complicated. This was a great risk. This time, in order to solve the problem in Ili Bali, Yang Chendong had brought along more than 100,000 cavalrymen with him. It could be said to be a huge force. With this force, no matter which faction they faced, they would have an advantage. However, if it was one against many, it would be hard to say. After all, the situation in a war is often changing in an instant. If they don't deal with it well, the situation will change drastically. If it had been someone else like Yang Chendong, The most conservative approach would have been to wait for more neon troops to be transferred here. That way, with the advantage of military strength, they could slowly nibble away at their opponents until they won the final victory. Yang Chendong's goal was too big, and he didn't want to waste the most precious time. If possible, he certainly hoped to solve the problem here as soon as possible, so that he could charge toward the next target. But although the idea was good, the reality was cruel. Especially in the situation where Ili, Turpan, and Yarkyang joined forces, plus Yeshen of Wara was watching him in the dark. The situation of this war became more and more complicated. And now, an opportunity to turn passivity into initiative appeared in front of him. Facing the new army's request, Yang Chendong was caught in a dilemma for a while. Logically speaking, he thought that this battle plan was too risky. If things went wrong, more than 30,000 people would be seriously injured by the enemy's 100,000 cavalry, and it was not impossible for them to be eaten. But psychologically, he thought that this was a bold and feasible plan, because even he was amazed by this plan and felt that it was incredible. Not to mention the enemy, they would definitely not think of it. To agree or not to agree, it was all up to him. Beta Persei, if the reconnaissance group and the light cavalry regiment attack with all their strength, how long will it take to meet the new army? Yang Chendong did not make a decision immediately, but wanted to understand the specific situation first. It will take at least a day and a half. Beta Persei came to a conclusion after roughly calculating the distance between the two sides. A day and a half? Yang Chendong pondered. In other words, within a day and a half, the new army would not receive any military support. Similarly, in a day and a half, the enemy would not make any preparations before the attack. Considering that it would take half a day for the Liaodong cavalry regiment near the Tianshan mountain to arrive at the battlefield, Yang Chendong could not make a decision for more than a day. Once this time passed, the enemy would be prepared, and the chances of winning would only be lower. With less than 40,000 cavalry against 100,000 cavalry, and an opponent who was very familiar with the environment, Yang Chendong decided to think about whether he should agree to this battle plan or not. Riding on the stable white dragon, Yang Chendong fell into a state of meditation with his eyes closed. At this moment, in the new army's general tent, several division commanders were anxiously pacing around. For hours had passed since the telegram was sent, but the reply telegram still had not arrived. No one had any idea whether to fight or not. At this moment, they were all gathered around Suhi, waiting for orders. What does the king mean? If you don't agree, you should at least tell us so that we can let the soldiers rest. Division Commander Lei Chuandang of the 3rd Cavalry Division was an impatient person, and he was the most talkative at this moment. Division Commander Lei, calm down. The king's thoughts and decisions are not something that subordinates like us can guess. It is also not something that we can recklessly guess. Division Commander Bai Kai of the 2nd Cavalry Division kindly reminded Lei Chuandang. Oh yes. Lei Chuandang's expression immediately became a little ugly. What was he doing just now? Was he questioning Bugnam of Gojoseon? When he thought of what he had done, he was shocked. In the 5-star army, Yang Chendong's prestige was so high that no one was allowed to question him. This was not Yang Chendong's request, but the unanimous opinion of these generals. It was just that the situation was a little tense right now. If it was any other time, Lei Chuandang would have dared to say such words. Perhaps there would be no need for others. As Commander Su, he would be able to take him down first. Fortunately, at this moment, Suhi was also anxious and felt the same as Lei Chuandang. That was why he did not reprimand him at this moment. The atmosphere in the large tent once again became tense. After an unknown amount of time, footsteps suddenly came from outside the tent. The telegraphers walked in and brought the results and answers that everyone wanted to see. Suhi was the first to take the telegram. After skimming through it, he let out a long breath and then said with an excited expression, "The 6th young master has already agreed to our request. Now please go and make your preparations." "That's right, send a telegram to inform Commander Tong Long that they can set off now." "General, Commander Tong Long sent us a telegram 6 hours ago, saying that he has already set off. He should be halfway there by now." The telegram operator stood at attention and reported. Actually, he had already said this before. However, Suhi was too nervous at that time and did not pay attention to it. Oh, right. Look at my brain. All right, Commander Tong Long and the others have already set off. They will reach the depths of the battlefield in 6 hours. This way, it will be midnight, which is also the time for us to launch our attack. Like this, all the division commanders will take their positions and let the soldiers fill their stomachs and prepare for battle. That's right, in order to not attract the enemy's attention, we must be tight on the inside and loose on the outside. Even if we eat, we must eat dry food and not hot food. In short, there must not be any abnormalities. Don't worry, Commander. We understand. The 4 division commanders immediately stood up and saluted. Then, they hurriedly left the tent. When Suhi was left alone, he sighed and said, "Sixth young master, just wait for the news of our new army's victory." Chapter 12:19. The sky gradually darkened. After the commotion during the day, Turpan city gradually calmed down. With 100,000 cavalry in front of the city, and the fact that it was late, many of the citizens who were preparing to leave decided to rest for the night. In this regard, King Hardenbarter didn't order them to hurry, because he had received reliable information that the 5-star army had already set up camp 40 kilometers away from the city. At this moment, they were only 10 miles away from the 100,000 cavalrymen outside the city. But this 10 miles was like a mote in Hardenbarter's eyes. 30,000 cavalrymen wanting to attack 100,000 cavalrymen was simply unscientific and unrealistic. No one would think that the 5-star army had the guts to do so. If he was them, it would be a good thing if the 100,000 cavalry didn't attack first. Speaking of not taking the initiative to attack, General Daichin was very annoyed. According to him, since the 5-star army only had 30,000 people, it was time for them to attack with their superior numbers. He was confident that they could defeat the enemy and force them to retreat. However, when he explained the situation to Uliji and Alefu, he was met with unanimous opposition. As reinforcements, they were only here to help evacuate Turpan city. They weren't here to attack the 5-star army. In their eyes, the best result would be for the 5-star army to retreat in the face of their 100,000-strong army. They would be able to force the enemy to retreat without shedding a drop of blood. It would be better than a chaotic battle, where both sides would suffer losses. The internal disagreement caused General Daichin to lose a chance to attack first. They didn't know what kind of disaster the loss of this opportunity would bring them. Bastards, a group of short-sighted people. They will be punished sooner or later. Daichin angrily returned to his tent with a face full of anger. After getting angry, Daichin didn't have any better ideas. No matter if it was Uliji or Alefu, they weren't his subordinates. If the enemy attacked, it would be fine. In order to unify the command, they would listen to his orders. But now, asking them to attack was indeed a bit too much. All right, then let's wait. When the main force of the 5-star army arrives, we'll have a huge battle. I want to see, since you're all cavalry and you're in our territory, what kind of waves can you cause? Daichin said as if he was comforting himself. After that, he asked the deputy general about the 5-star army. He heard that the 5-star army had also entered a period of quietness after nightfall. It seemed that they had also entered a period of rest like him. However, before waiting for the great battle that might happen the day after tomorrow, he also gave the order that other than the necessary guards, everyone else could also rest. Just like what Yang Chendong and Suhi thought, no one would think that they would attack at this time, before the army was fully assembled. It was because of this that it had the effect of catching them off guard. At this moment, in the new army's camp, all the cavalry were waiting in the dark. He was clad in armor and had a sharp scimitar in his hand. Beside him were war horses wrapped in thick cotton cloth. Even these war horses had muzzles on their mouths to prevent them from making any noise. Waiting. Silently waiting. At this moment, the 30,000 cavalry warriors of the new army only had one target, which was the enemy camp 10 miles away on the right. They were waiting for the signal of the Liaodong cavalry regiment to attack. Daichin was indeed worthy of being given such a heavy responsibility by King Hadambar. His military skills were unquestionable. He arranged for the two armies to be 10 miles away from each other to prevent any accidents from happening. For example, if there was a sneak attack, 10 miles away would give them some time to react. But no one would have thought that the new army wasn't going to be the first to attack. The first to attack was the Liaodong Cavalry Regiment that came from Tian Shan. A reinforced regiment only had 5,000 cavalry. This time, they had the heavy responsibility of attacking the 30,000 cavalry camp. This was like hitting a rock with an egg. If possible, Suhi didn't want to give such an order. But everything was for victory. In order to win, he had to do this. I only hope that Tong Long's regiment doesn't disappoint. Also send out the order. Once the divisions and regiments notice that the enemy camp is in chaos, they must attack immediately. Suhi looked into the distance and was worried for Tong Long's reinforced regiment. But now that the order was given, all he could do was enter the battlefield as quickly as possible to reduce the pressure on the enemy. Late at night, the wind was cold. After a long journey, the Liaodong cavalry finally arrived at their target. Order everyone to rest for an hour and replenish their food. Regiment Commander Tong Long let out a long breath. After rushing all the way, they finally arrived. At this moment, the fatigue on his body seemed to have decreased by a lot. Regiment Commander, drink some water. Zhao Xing came over and handed over a leather bag filled with water. Thank you. Tong Long took it without any hesitation. Then he gulped down a few mouthfuls of the wine and murmured, satisfied. Regiment Commander, I'll charge at the front. You just need to stay behind. Zhao Xing came with a purpose. How can I do that? Tong Long rejected without even thinking about it. Then he patted Zhao Xing's shoulder and said, I appreciate your kind intentions, but how can I change my plans so easily? But Zhao Xing tried to persuade him. But you're the regiment commander. Our Liaodong cavalry regiment can do without anyone but the regiment commander. Bugnam of Gojoseon also said that unless it's necessary, we're not allowed to go to the front lines. Seeing that Zhao Xing was still trying to persuade him, Tong Long patted his shoulder and said, Now is a critical time. You should know how much pressure our regiment is under. Plus, in terms of martial arts, you're not as good as me. You have to admit that. Tong Long was a famous general in the Liaodong region. Compared to him, Zhao Xing's skills were second-rate. His advantage was that he was smart. Now that Tong Long pointed it out, he knew that there was no point in saying more. Okay, I can agree with the regiment commander going to the front lines. But you have to be careful. If there's any danger, retreat immediately. If you're not here, our Liaodong cavalry regiment doesn't need to exist anymore. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. Tong Long laughed. But no matter how you looked at it, it didn't look like he knew what he was doing. Zhao Xing could only sigh and walk towards the soldiers beside the regiment commander. Since he couldn't order the regiment commander, he could only think of a way from these soldiers. The Yirkiang tribe on the left side of the camp near Tianshan was very quiet. Compared to Daichin's anger, Aleifu was in a good mood. He hummed a tune and went to sleep early. In his dream, he saw himself leading an army to defeat the 5-star army. He was leading 30,000 cavalrymen to charge forward with a momentum that could topple mountains and overturn seas. The war drums were beating, and the battle cries were shaking the heavens. It was truly a lively scene. General, General. Just as he was having a beautiful dream, he suddenly felt a large hand pushing him. This made Aleifu a little unhappy, and he suddenly opened his eyes. At this moment, he realized that he was lying on a bed. At this moment, he also realized that it was just a dream. It was just a dream. Just as Aleifu was about to let out a sigh of relief, he suddenly revealed a shocked expression. No, if it was a dream, then why was it so clear? Now that he had opened his eyes, why was there still the sound of iron hooves? What was going on? Before Aleifu could ask, the soldier that woke him up said, General, enemy attack, enemy attack. The deputy general has already led the troops over. What? Enemy attack? Aleifu immediately sat up from the bed. At first, he was confused. After a few breaths, he reacted and asked, How could it be an enemy attack? The 5-star army only has 30,000 cavalry. Would they dare to attack us? Also, the Turpan cavalry is in the middle of the army. Shouldn't they be the closest to the 5-star army? Did they already retreat? It was because his tent was right next to the Turpan cavalry camp. If the 5-star army wanted to charge over, they would have to pass through that barrier first. Alefu was caught off guard, and now that he heard that there was an enemy attack, he naturally felt helpless. No, General. The 5-star army isn't the 5-star army from the front. They came from Tian Shan. The bodyguard didn't know how to explain. He could only tell what he knew and what he saw. Not the 5-star army from the front. Could it be the main force of the 5-star army is here? Oh right, how many people are there? Alefu thought of a terrifying possibility. The sky is too dark. It's impossible to see. There seems to be a lot of people. They came from all directions and their battle cries shook the sky. Because of the sky, visibility was limited. The soldier didn't know the details and could only answer based on his own guesses. When he heard that there were a lot of people, Alefu's face became very ugly. If both sides were to fight head-on, he wouldn't be afraid of anyone. But now that he wasn't on guard at all, he didn't know how much fighting strength the army could bring out. The soldier was still waiting for the general's orders. No one knew how bad the situation outside was. Perhaps if they delayed for a second, they would lose a lot more men. Looking at the general, he seemed to be in a hopeless situation. The soldier suggested, "General, we can ask the Turpan army for help. This time, we are here to help them. They have the duty and responsibility to help us." Chapter 12:20. Oh yes. Quick, send someone to ask General Daichin for help, quick. At this moment, as if he had just woken up from a dream, Alefu shouted loudly. Then, the sound of hurriedly putting on armor rang out in the tent. Outside the tent, the sky was filled with flames and the sounds of people shouting and horses neighing could be heard. The moment before the charge, there was a flurry of fire arrows that burned countless tents and dealt a heavy blow to the unprepared Yi Erqiang army. Taking advantage of this chaos, Commander Tong Long took the lead and charged into the enemy's camp. With a swing of his sword, he beheaded 2 Yi Erqiang cavalrymen who were charging towards him. His bravery gave the 5-star corps cavalrymen behind him a boost of morale, greatly reducing the Yi Erqiang cavalrymen's morale. Who dares to sneak into the camp? You're courting death. The deputy general appeared. As Alefu's deputy, he wasn't so careless. Even when he slept with his clothes on. This allowed him to react in the shortest time possible. Once the deputy general's roar sounded, the Yi Erqiang cavalrymen who ran out of the tents couldn't help but be delighted. Everyone seemed to have found their backbone and began to hold their weapons, looking for war horses and preparing to counterattack. I think you're courting death. Tong Long, who had just killed 2 people, heard the deputy general's roar and his eyes lit up. Although he didn't know the identity of the other party, his intuition told him that the person in front of him should be someone important. With his status, killing such a person would give him a sense of accomplishment and cause a heavy blow to the Yi Erqiang army. His legs clamped onto the horse's body and Tong Long rushed out. Along the way, he killed several people and rushed in front of the deputy general. Watch my blade. The deputy general was shocked by Tong Long's speed and anxiously slashed out with his blade. Tong Long, who was already prepared, just leaned to the side on his horse and dodged the slash. Then the saber in his hand slashed towards the other party's waist. The saber borrowed the horse's momentum and with just one slash, there was a piercing sound as the saber and the armor came into close contact. He relied on the armor to protect his life. Even so, there was still a bloody wound that was half the length of an arm on his body. Pain enveloped the deputy general's entire body. He forced himself to take a deep breath and turned around to leave. The facts had already proven that he was no match for General Lai. He was seriously injured in just one move. If they continued to fight, he would lose his life here. There was nothing shameful about running away when they couldn't win. However, it would weaken their morale, especially when 2 armies were fighting. As a general, such an action was likely to lead to the collapse of the army. However, at this moment, in order to save his own life, the deputy general didn't think so much. He just wanted to rush out and find a place to heal himself. However, this idea of his was destined to never be realized, because Tong Long had already locked onto him with his first strike. After the two of them passed by each other, Tong Long turned his horse around. Seeing the scene of the deputy general fleeing, a murderous intent flashed in his eyes. He put away his saber and took out his strong bow from his back. With the help of the light from the torches around him, an arrow quickly left the bowstring and shot towards the unsuspecting deputy general. The sound of the arrow piercing through the air rang out. If it was just two people fighting one-on-one, the deputy general would definitely be alerted. However, the entire camp was in chaos now. How could he care about such things? The deputy general was only trying his best to escape on his horse and leave this place. Whoosh! The long arrow pierced through his body. Under the powerful force, it pierced through his chest from his back. The deputy general felt a sudden heart-wrenching pain in his body. Then his head drooped and his hands lost strength. He fell from his horse head to the ground. One saber and one arrow took the life of the deputy general. Tong Long's bravery was indeed not to be underestimated. After killing the deputy general, he laughed and put away his strong bow. He picked up his curved horse and shouted loudly, "Your general is already dead. Why don't you surrender?" This shout was as loud as thunder, and the sound spread far and wide. Deputy Commander Zhao Xing, who was leading 1,000 cavalrymen as the reserve camp, was currently leading them in shooting arrows that were lit on fire. His mission was very simple. It was to burn as many of the Yirqiang army's tents as possible under the chaos. In the darkness of the night, they would give the impression that they had the numbers advantage. Deputy Commander, listen. Is that the commander's voice? One of the 5-star Army's cavalrymen with sharp ears stopped shooting the fire arrows and asked Vice Commander Zhao Xing. Zhao Xing also stopped what he was doing and listened carefully. Then he really heard Tong Long's shout. He laughed and said, "Good. The commander is indeed brave. In such a short time, you killed the enemy's general. Come, everyone, let's shoot arrows and shout at the same time. Let's maximize the effect." Regardless of whether it was Zhao Xing or Tong Long, they didn't know that it was the deputy general of the Yirqiang army. However, this didn't stop them from shouting. At the very least, the deputy general was still a general. The impact of the shout from one person to 1,000 people shouting was completely different. In just a short moment, this shout spread throughout the entire Yirqiang camp, causing the already chaotic camp to become even more chaotic. When the Yirqiang soldiers heard the shout, they weren't sure if it was true or not. However, at this moment, they would rather believe it than not. Otherwise, they would have to pay the most precious price, their lives. With the general dead, the morale of the soldiers fell to the freezing point. The Yirqiang soldiers who were still resisting with their blades started to flee in batches. They wanted to escape under the cover of the night. None of them wanted to die. When Aleifu walked out of the tent in armor under the protection of his personal guards, this was the scene he saw. When he heard the shouts that the general was dead and they still didn't want to surrender, Aleifu said angrily, "Bullshit, this general is still alive and well. Who said I'm dead?" "General, be careful with your words." A personal guard at the side immediately reached out to cover his mouth and said with a panicked expression, "What are you doing?" Aleifu reached out and slapped his hand away, his face full of anger. "General, the one who died just now must be the deputy general. Now that the morale of the army is in chaos, it won't help if you stand out. Instead, you'll attract the attention of the enemy. The gains don't make up for the losses." The personal guard's mind was still clear at this moment, and he expressed his worries. Aleifu, who originally wanted to punish the personal guard, was stunned when he heard this. Then he broke out in cold sweat. Yes, at this time, the morale of the army was in chaos and there was no way to effectively counterattack. If he stood out now, not only would he not be able to solve the problem, he might even attract the attention of the enemy cavalry. If that happened, he would probably follow in the footsteps of the deputy general. At the same time, Aleifu patted the personal guard's shoulder. "You did well. What do you think we should do now?" "General, the Han people have a saying. A gentleman doesn't stand under a collapsing wall. Let's retreat first. As long as we're here, there will be a day when Dongshan rises again. This personal guard was indeed somewhat knowledgeable. It wasn't easy for him to say such a thing at this time. These words were to Alepha's liking. He immediately nodded. You're right. How about this, we'll retreat immediately. As he spoke, Alepha even took the initiative to take off the armor he just wore. Clearly, he didn't want to expose himself because of this set of clothes. However, what happened next proved that Alepha was thinking too much. Because from start to finish, Tonglong didn't have the intention to kill him. Their goal was to create chaos here and force Yi Erqiang's cavalry to retreat. Then, they would attack the Turpan cavalry in the middle of the army. Yes, this was the true goal of the Liaodong cavalry corps. After suffering once, General Daiqin became much more careful in his actions. Even if the 5-star army didn't make any moves, he still arranged for many soldiers to be on guard. This was to prevent the 5-star army from launching a sneak attack. For this reason, Suhi sent out hundreds of cavalry scouts, but the result was exactly the same. It was impossible to break into the battlefield from the front, which was guarded. This was also why the new army didn't attack first. Instead, they let the Liaodong cavalry corps fire the first arrow. If the Turpan cavalry didn't create chaos, they wouldn't have a chance. And whether or not they could create chaos all depended on the Liaodong cavalry corps. With only 5,000 cavalry, not only did they have to break through Yi Erqiang's 30,000 cavalry camp, they also had to deal a heavy blow to the Turpan cavalry. From this, it could be seen how difficult this mission was. This was also where Suhi's worries came from. Fortunately, Tonglong had won the first battle. He had caught the Yi Erqiang cavalry by surprise and even killed their deputy general. He had completely disrupted the morale of the army and perfectly completed the first step of the battle plan. Tonglong sighed as he watched the Yi Erqiang soldiers, who had turned from cavalry to infantry, scurrying away like rats. What a pity! How many prisoners were there? Unfortunately, he still had things to do and couldn't stop to take care of them. A pained expression flashed across Tonglong's heart as he pointed his saber forward, pointing at the Turpan camp in the distance as he shouted, "Brothers of the reinforced regiment, charge with this regiment commander!" Charge! Turpan camp. The Yi Erqiang camp on the left suddenly lit up with flames. This naturally shocked everyone. General Daiqin, who was still sleeping, jumped up and rushed out of the camp. He looked to the west and his eyes flashed with worry. Report, the 5-star army suddenly charged into the Yi Erqiang camp. The two sides are fighting. A scout galloped to the front of General Daiqin and reported. Scout again. I want to know how many people they have. Daiqin said without changing his expression. Report, General Alepha sent people to ask for help. He said they can't hold on anymore. After a while, another scout galloped to report. Chapter 12:21. Anger flashed across Daiqin's face. The 30,000 cavalry couldn't hold on anymore? In his opinion, this was simply because Astral didn't want to resist, and didn't want to fight head-on with the 5-star army. It was just a way to preserve his strength. Even if we can't hold on, we still have to. Ignore them. Daiqin snorted coldly. How could it be so easy to win without putting in any effort? Daiqin believed that even if the 30,000 cavalry met with a sudden attack, it would only be a temporary panic. As long as they stayed true to their hearts, they would be able to quickly turn the situation around. There was nothing to be worried about. What he was worried about was the fact that he didn't understand. Who were these 5-star cavalry that suddenly appeared? How many people were there? How did they appear on the west side without anyone noticing? The answer to this question was quickly revealed. This was because Tonglong had already led 4,000 cavalrymen towards the Turpan camp. Because there were already scouts keeping an eye on the situation. The moment Tonglong and the others made their move, they were immediately discovered by the scouts of the Turfan army and reported back. On the way back, they met some Turpan cavalry who were guarding the front. When they heard that someone was coming from the side, they immediately went up to meet them. On the battlefield, there was a saying that the commander's orders were not to be given out. Now that the 5-star army was right in front of them, The Turpan cavalry in charge of guarding the front couldn't just sit there and do nothing. In reality, even if they didn't meet them, Tong Long would have brought his army over. This was his important mission. Good timing. Seeing that the enemy was about to meet them, Tong Long laughed loudly. Then, with less than 4,000 men, they charged straight at the 3,000 cavalry. With the advantage in numbers and the imposing killing intent, both sides left behind many corpses and blood after just one clash. The enemy is so strong, request for reinforcements. In the same clash, the Turpan general, who had lost hundreds of cavalrymen, sensed an immense sense of danger. As he swung his saber through the air, he yelled loudly to the soldiers beside him. The personal guard turned around and rode away. Not long after, a group of 3,000 Turpan cavalrymen, who were also tasked with guarding the defensive line, arrived. As they left, the Turpan defense fell into a weakened state. The new army scouts, who were in charge of understanding the situation, shot out a signal gun into the sky. A bright red light shot into the sky, appearing so eye-catching and bright in the silent night. Let's go. In front of the new army tent, General Su He finally received the signal to act. He immediately roared and the 30,000 five-star army cavalry charged out like a pack of wolves. However, unlike before, they didn't shout. Under the heavy protection of the horses' mouths and hooves, the 30,000 cavalry charged forward like ghosts, approaching the Turpan front lines. It was only a distance of 10 li. The new army cavalry, who were prepared, only took 5 to 6 minutes to charge out. However, these 5 to 6 minutes were like torture for the Liaodong cavalry regiment. General Daiqin, who had been injured once, was very careful this time. Just the cavalry at the front of the camp alone numbered 15,000. They were split into 5 groups, each of which was 3,000 cavalry. When Tong Long brought the 4,000 cavalry and charged in, a total of 3 groups of 9,000 Turpan cavalry entered the battlefield. With double the number advantage, they quickly surrounded the Liaodong cavalry regiment. Not only that, Daiqin, who had received the news, had already called all the cavalry in the camp. He arranged for the generals to come to the camp for a meeting while ordering all the cavalry to put on their armor and get on their horses. This time, Daiqin's reaction was extremely fast. Even though he hadn't seen through the 5-star army's plan of attack, he relied on his advantage in numbers and made up his mind to take down the thousands of 5-star army cavalry that he had surrounded. General Dan, you bring 5,000 cavalry to stabilize the northern line, in case the 5-star army's main force suddenly invades. General Tong, you bring 5,000 cavalry to continue the encirclement of the 5-star army. This time, we can't let any of them escape. The other generals quickly prepare for battle and wait for the order to attack. At the same time, send someone to contact General Wu Liji and tell him to also prepare to attack the 5-star army. Daiqin quickly made a series of arrangements, and the generals quickly headed out of the tent. Then, a messenger came to report that on the main battlefield, the 5-star army had indeed launched an attack. 2 groups of 6,000 cavalry were fighting with their lives on the line. They came so fast. General Daiqin's eyes flashed with surprise, but he quickly calmed down. He was confident in his cavalry. As long as they could hold on for a while, once the 5-star army was completely wiped out, he would be free to deal with the enemy at the front. At that time, with the help of the 30,000 cavalrymen from Ili, a beautiful counterattack wouldn't be a problem for them to achieve victory. At this time, on the main battlefield, the intense battle had just begun. The new army was already prepared. Under the cover of the night, they were only discovered when they were a mile away from the Turpan cavalry. Then both sides first engaged in a battle of long-range archery. After both sides suffered casualties, the close combat battle began. On the side of the new army, the one in charge of the vanguard was the new army's 1st Cavalry Division's commander, Kalu. To be able to become the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Kalu's strength was obviously above normal commanders. This time he was the vanguard. It could be seen that Suhi had high hopes for him. Therefore, in the first charge, the 1st Cavalry Division fully displayed their ferocious momentum. At one point, they fiercely suppressed the 2 battalions, 6,000 Turpan cavalry, and forced them to retreat. When they gained the upper hand in the first battle, and the situation was better than he had expected, he was both excited and worried. He was excited because the number of enemy cavalry was less than he had expected. He originally thought that with the strength of the Liaodong cavalry regiment, after messing up Yi Erqiang's cavalry camp, it would be good enough to attract the attention of the 2 Turpan cavalry units. Now it seemed that the effect was even better. They actually attracted a total of 3 units. This reduced the pressure on him on the battlefield by a lot, allowing him to complete his mission better. He was excited. What he was worried about was that the Liaodong cavalry regiment, which only had 5,000 people, was surrounded by enemy cavalry several times their number. Every minute was torture. If they couldn't meet up with the enemy, they wouldn't be able to hold on for long. Attack with full force. No matter what, we have to open up a bloody path to meet up with the Liaodong cavalry division. Kalu rode on the horse and constantly observed the situation in front of him. He sent an order to the messenger beside him. Before the order was given, another cavalry scout ran over. Before the person arrived, his voice was already loud. Division commander, the Turpan cavalry has increased. 5,000 cavalry are coming towards us. 5,000 cavalry are going to the left flank. What? Hearing the Turpan cavalry's quick reaction, Kalu's face became a little ugly. The enemy's quick reaction obviously increased the difficulty of the following plan. Narrowing his eyes, Kalu quickly suppressed the nervousness in his heart. After forcing himself to calm down, he suddenly shouted, "Men, inform the first captain Wu Ba to go and rescue the first unit of the Liaodong cavalry regiment. In short, even if you have to use your body, you have to create a way out for me." The 1st Regiment commander Wu Ba, as his name suggested, was abnormally tall and sturdy. He weighed no less than 80 kilograms, and his body was 8 feet tall, 184 meters tall. Logically speaking, this kind of weight wasn't suitable for cavalry. This was because the problem of weight would inevitably increase the burden on the warhorse. However, Wu Ba was tall and agile. Later on, he was specially recruited to be a member of the cavalry. Because of his size, his warhorse was also specially allocated and belonged to the very tall category. At the same time, Wu Ba was also a subordinate that Kalu admired very much. At the time, he was the 1st Regiment commander of the 1st Cavalry Division. This time, Kalu sent him to reinforce the reinforced regiment. This was enough to prove that he valued this ally very much. The moment Kalu gave the order, the other officers from the division headquarters were all stunned. One of them said with a face of worry, "Wu Ba is leading the main force of our 1st Cavalry Division. Now there are still 5,000 Turpan cavalry coming at us. Why don't we send other regimental commanders to rescue the reinforced regiment?" "Other regiments? Who's up to the task?" Kalu asked without any explanation. Then he shook his head and said, "This division commander knows what you are thinking. With Wu Ba gone, the pressure on us will definitely increase. However, this division commander still has to do this. When we came here, the division commander gave an absolute order that the reinforced regiment must be rescued. They are risking their lives for us. If something really happens, how will others look at us? How will Bugnam of Gojoseon look at us?" After asking a few questions in one breath, Kalu saw that the other officers seemed to have something to say. He directly waved his hand and said, "All right, this division commander's orders cannot be changed. If you have any objections, you can convey them to the division commander after the battle." On the battlefield, the division commander had the final say. It was precisely because of this that the morale of the army could be guaranteed. As for whether there would be different opinions on the battlefield, that would be decided by the division commander. Since Kalu had said this, even if the other officers had different opinions, they could only obey. After giving this order, Kalu's gaze involuntarily turned towards the Ili camp on the other side. According to the battle plan formulated by the new army, the Liaodong Cavalry Reinforced Regiment was responsible for messing up the Yarqiang camp and charging towards the Turpan camp. The 1st Cavalry Division was responsible for attacking the Turpan camp from the front. These plans revolved around one goal, and that was to create an opportunity for the other 3 cavalry divisions of the new army to attack the Ili camp. You're tuning in to the Lee May's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.